The fluorescent light above Leo's desk flickered with a tired rhythm, casting uneven shadows across the scattered paperwork. Outside his apartment window, the city slept under a blanket of orange-tinted streetlights, the distant hum of traffic a low, constant drone. He rubbed his eyes, the numbers on the spreadsheet before him blurring into meaningless patterns. Another late night, another deadline looming. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, a bitter sludge in the mug bearing the cracked logo of a company that no longer existed. He leaned back in his chair, the old leather groaning in protest. The apartment was small, a single room with a kitchenette crammed into one corner, a bed against the far wall, and this desk that served as both workspace and dining table. Books on urban planning and architecture lined a makeshift shelf, their spines cracked from use. A faint smell of mildew lingered from the perpetually damp bathroom, mingling with the scent of stale coffee and dust. Leo's thoughts drifted to the mundane worries that had become the background noise of his life: rent due next week, the persistent ache in his lower back from too many hours hunched over, the vague sense that he was running in place while the world moved on without him. He was 32, ordinary in every measurable way, with no grand ambitions left beyond paying his bills and maybe, someday, taking a vacation somewhere with actual sunlight. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a trick of his exhausted eyes, a shimmer in the air like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But it didn't dissipate. It hung there, about 3 feet from his face, a distortion in reality that made the wall behind it seem to warp and bend. Leo blinked hard, but the shimmer remained, coalescing into something more defined. It wasn't a shape he could describe with geometry he understood. Angles met in ways that hurt to look at, lines curving back on themselves in impossible configurations. Colors shifted through spectra he couldn't name, hues that seemed to vibrate at the edge of perception. A prompt formed within the non-Euclidean space. Not words in any language he knew, but concepts that impressed themselves directly into his mind. Initiate assimilation protocol. The meaning was clear, though the source was anything but. Alongside it came other impressions, Y/N, though the symbols were alien glyphs that pulsed with faint inner light, and a timer counting down from 60 seconds in digits that seemed to be made of condensed starlight. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He glanced around the apartment, half expecting to see cameras or some elaborate prank. But there was only the quiet room, the flickering light, his own ragged breathing. The shimmer didn't vanish when he looked away. It persisted, an undeniable presence in his personal space. Curiosity warred with primal caution. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. His rational mind screamed at him to look away, to call someone, to do anything but engage with this impossible thing. But another part of him, the part that had grown tired of spreadsheets and deadlines and the slow erosion of dreams, leaned forward. His hand lifted almost of its own volition. His fingers brushed the shimmering prompt. The cold was instantaneous and profound. It wasn't the cold of ice or winter air, but something deeper, more invasive, the cold of empty space between stars, of absolute absence. It raced up his arm, through his shoulder, and into his chest. Leo gasped, his breath frosting in the warm apartment air. The shimmer collapsed inward, flowing into his skin like liquid mercury, tracing his veins with icy fire. His vision whited out. When it returned, he was on the floor, his chair overturned beside him. The world had changed. Overlaid across his normal sight was a grid of faint green lines, like a tactical display from a video game. In the corner of his vision, translucent panels floated, filled with scrolling text in that same alien script. He could understand it now, not through translation but through direct neural implantation. Eldritch Assimilation Interface activated. User, Leo. Designation, Patient 0. Biological overwrite in progress, 12%. Pain blossomed in every cell. It wasn't the sharp pain of injury, but a deep, grinding ache as something foreign rewrote the very code of his being. His muscles spasmed uncontrollably. He could feel his bones shifting, his organs rearranging themselves to accommodate new systems. A hunger awoke in him, not for food, but for something else. For flesh, for biomass, for the raw material of life itself. The urge was overwhelming, a tidal wave of need that threatened to drown his consciousness. Desperate, his mind flailed against the alien presence now rooted in his brain. One of the interface panels glowed brighter. Basic commands available. Instinct guided him. He focused on the hunger, visualized pushing it down, containing it. The interface responded. Command, psychic link, self-suppression. Sanity cost, initiated. The hunger receded, forced into a corner of his mind where it growled and paced like a caged animal. But the price was immediate. The interface didn't just obey, it showed him why. Reality tore open. Leo wasn't in his apartment anymore. He floated in a void where physics had died screaming. Around him stretched the cosmos, but not as science described it. Stars weren't balls of fusion, they were wounds in the fabric of existence, weeping light that was actually a form of decay. Galaxies swirled not from gravity, but from the convulsions of entities so vast their thoughts were geological epochs. Space itself was sick, infected with what the interface labeled cosmic rot, a festering, multidimensional cancer that consumed order and spewed out madness. He saw Earth not as a planet, but as a tiny, trembling organism in a petri dish, unaware of the laboratory lights above. Humanity were cells on its surface, their civilizations mere patterns in a culture soon to be scraped away. And through it all ran threads of something dark and hungry, tendrils of entities that existed outside time, reaching in to harvest, to assimilate, to consume not just matter but meaning itself. The vision burned into his mind with the searing intensity of a brand. Leo screamed, but no sound came out. His sanity, that fragile construct of routine and rationality, cracked. The interface recorded it dispassionately. Sanity meter, 94/100. A counter he hadn't noticed before now pulsed in his peripheral vision. Then he was back on the floor of his apartment, gasping like a drowned man. Sweat soaked his shirt. The grid overlay remained, the interface panel steady. The biological overwrite counter now read, 47%. The hunger was still there, contained but present. He could feel new connections forming in his brain, pathways that allowed him to sense the interface's functions. Basic commands floated in his awareness: psychic link, which he'd just used on himself, horde command, scatter, grayed out and unavailable, and others listed but locked behind requirements he didn't understand. Slowly, painfully, Leo pushed himself to his knees. His body felt alien, stronger, more responsive, but wrong. His senses were heightened. He could hear the drip of a leaky faucet in the apartment below, the rustle of a mouse in the walls, the distant elevator machinery groaning. Smells assaulted him, the mildew, the dust, the lingering scent of his own fear, and underneath it all, something new, the scent of living flesh, of potential biomass. His mouth watered involuntarily, and he clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He staggered to his feet, using the desk for support. The overturned chair lay where it had fallen. The spreadsheet was still open on his computer monitor, the numbers now utterly meaningless. He caught his reflection in the dark glass of the window. His eyes glowed. Not with reflected light, but with their own inner illumination, a faint, sickly green that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The pupils had elongated slightly, taking on a subtle, unnatural shape. The interface helpfully provided a label: Eldritch Bioluminescence, active. He raised a hand to his face, half expecting the reflection to do something different, but it mimicked his movement perfectly. The man in the glass was him, but changed. Patient zero. Then the screaming started. It came from outside his door at first, a short, sharp cry of terror that cut off abruptly. Then another, farther down the hall. Then a whole chorus of them, rising through the building like a wave. Shouts of confusion, cries of pain, the sound of something heavy falling. A door slammed somewhere, followed by the wet, tearing sounds of violence. Leo froze, his enhanced hearing painting a terrible picture. The infection was spreading. The interface had seeded something through him, and now it was propagating through the building. He could feel them, faint, distant presences in his mind, like stars blinking into existence on a dark map. Dozens of them. Hungry. Mindless. His. Infected detected in proximity. Horde formation, initial stage. Recommendation: establish control or evacuate. The interface panels updated, new options flickering. But all Leo could do was stare at his glowing reflection as the screams multiplied, coming closer now, moving up the stairwell toward his floor. The countdown to something far worse had begun, and he was standing at its epicenter, holding the leash to monsters he'd somehow created. The door to Leo's apartment swung open with a creak that sounded unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had followed the initial screams. He stood in the threshold, one hand gripping the doorframe as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. His apartment behind him felt like a tomb, cold, empty, and stained with the memory of what had just happened. The shimmering prompt, the pain, the overwrite. The interface was now a constant presence in his mind, a cold, alien overlay on his thoughts that hummed with barely restrained power. He stepped into the hallway, and the world erupted into chaos. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, casting strobing shadows that danced across walls smeared with something dark and viscous. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and another odor, sickly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. Cosmic rot. The name came unbidden from the interface, accompanied by a flicker of that same vision from before, reality peeling back to reveal screaming, decaying flesh beneath. Leo shook his head, trying to clear the image, but it lingered at the edges of his perception like a persistent afterimage. Down the hall, a woman in a bathrobe was pinned against a wall by a man whose arm had twisted into a grotesque, multi-jointed limb ending in sharp, bony protrusions. The woman's screams were cut short as the limb pierced her throat, and she slid to the floor, her eyes wide and empty. The man, the infected, turned, its head rotating with an unnatural smoothness. Its eyes were milky white, glowing faintly with the same eldritch light Leo had seen in his own reflection. It sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring, and then its gaze locked onto Leo. Hunger. The word wasn't a thought so much as a primal impulse that radiated from the infected. Leo felt it like a physical pressure against his mind, a ravenous, mindless need to consume flesh, to spread the rot. His own stomach twisted in response, a deep, gnawing emptiness that made his mouth water. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms. The interface hummed louder, offering a command, psychic link. Forge a connection. Control. But using it came with a cost. He remembered the sanity loss from earlier, the way reality had frayed at the seams. Could he afford to lose more? The infected took a step toward him, then another, its movements jerky but swift. Behind it, more shapes emerged from doorways and shadows, neighbors, friends, strangers, all twisted by the cosmic rot. Some stumbled, limbs malformed, others moved with predatory grace, their bodies reshaped into weapons. The hallway was becoming a gauntlet of hunger. Leo backed against his door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The first infected, the man with the twisted arm, was now only 10 feet away. It let out a guttural growl, saliva dripping from jaws that seemed to unhinge too widely. The hunger intensified, a wave of psychic static that made Leo's vision blur. He could feel the infected's consciousness, if it could be called that, a swirling vortex of alien whispers, fragments of memories that no longer made sense, and that all-consuming need to feed. There was no time to think. Leo reached out with his mind, not with his hands, and activated the psychic link command. The world dissolved. One moment, he was in the hallway, surrounded by flickering lights and the sounds of violence. The next, he was drowning in the infected man's mind. It was a screaming void, a place where human thought had been shredded and replaced by something else. Leo saw flashes. The man's name was Carl, he had been an accountant, he liked gardening, but those fragments were being consumed by whispers that came from somewhere beyond the stars. The whispers spoke of geometries that hurt to perceive, of entities that hungered not for flesh but for the very fabric of reality. They promised assimilation, unity, an end to the painful isolation of individual consciousness. Leo tried to pull back, but the interface held him there. It was forging the link, weaving his will into the infected psyche. The cost was immediate. His sanity, already frayed, tore a little more. The hallway around him wavered, the walls breathing like living tissue. The blood on the floor seemed to pulse with a light of its own. He could see the cosmic rot spreading through the building, not just as physical decay but as a metaphysical infection. Reality itself was sick here, and he was at the center of it. Through the agony of the connection, Leo focused. He pushed past the whispers, past the hunger, and issued a single, clear mental order: stand down. Stop. Obey. The infected, Carl, froze. Its twisted arm lowered. The milky glow in its eyes shifted, taking on a faint echo of Leo's own eldritch light. The hunger didn't vanish, but it was redirected, channeled through the link. Leo could feel it as a low thrum in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of what he now controlled. Carl took a step back, then another, until it stood passively beside Leo, its head slightly bowed. The first member of his horde. Leo gasped, breaking the connection. The hallway snapped back into focus, but it was altered. The flickering lights now cast shadows that seemed to move independently, twitching like nervous creatures. The air felt colder, thinner, as if he were breathing in the void between stars. His hands trembled. How much sanity had that cost? The interface provided no numbers, only the lingering sense of fragility, like his mind was a pane of glass with new cracks spreading from the edges. But it had worked. Carl was under his control. Leo could feel the link, a thin psychic thread connecting them. He could sense Carl's position, his readiness, even the dim echo of his hunger. It was a tool, a weapon. And there were more infected in the hallway, 5, 6, maybe more, all turning their attention toward him now that the first had been subdued. Leo didn't hesitate. He activated Psychic Link again, this time targeting 2 more infected, a woman whose legs had fused into a single, muscular limb that allowed her to leap with terrifying speed, and a man whose mouth had split into a vertical maw lined with needle-like teeth. The sanity cost was cumulative. Each connection ripped another piece of his perception away. As he forged the links, he saw flashes of the cosmic truth behind the rot, the universe as a vast, living organism, and Earth as a festering wound being prepared for excision. The alien entities were surgeons, and the interface was their scalpel. He was the incision point. He pushed the visions aside, focusing on the immediate threat. With 3 infected under his control, he issued a mental command: clear the hallway. Protect. The infected moved with coordinated precision that belied their twisted forms. Carl lunged at a nearby infected that was clawing at a door, his twisted arm slamming it against the wall. The woman with the fused legs leaped, tackling another to the ground. The maw man positioned himself in front of Leo, a living barrier. The other infected in the hallway hesitated, their hunger conflicting with the psychic dominance radiating from Leo's small horde. For a moment, there was a stalemate. The sounds of violence from elsewhere in the building continued, screams, crashes, the wet sounds of tearing flesh, but in this stretch of hallway, there was only the tense silence of predators assessing each other. Leo leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. The interface hummed, a constant reminder of the power at his fingertips and the price he was paying. He could feel his thoughts becoming disjointed. Memories of his life before, his job, his apartment, the ordinary worries of bills and groceries, felt like they belonged to someone else, a character in a story he had once read. He needed to move. The building wasn't safe. The military would come eventually, if they weren't already on their way. And the interface had given him a goal, buried beneath the madness: establish a base. Survive. Expand. The subway tunnels. They were close, accessible through the basement. Dark, labyrinthine, defensible. A place to hide and gather his strength. He was about to order his horde to move toward the stairwell when a sound caught his attention, the creak of a door opening slowly, carefully. From the stairwell at the end of the hallway, a group of people emerged. 4 of them. Survivors. They were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. One, a man in his 40s with a receding hairline and glasses, held a fire extinguisher like a club. A younger woman with a backpack gripped a kitchen knife, her hands shaking. Behind them were 2 others, a teenage boy clutching a baseball bat, and an older woman with a determined set to her jaw. They had clearly been trying to escape the building, moving quietly to avoid the infected. Their eyes swept the hallway, taking in the carnage, the twisted bodies, the blood. Then they saw Leo. And they saw Carl, and the other 2 infected, standing obediently beside him, their eldritch-lit eyes fixed on their master. The man with the fire extinguisher froze, his mouth falling open. The woman with the knife let out a choked gasp. They didn't see a man fighting for survival. They didn't see someone trying to control the horror. They saw a figure surrounded by monsters, his own eyes glowing with that same unnatural light. They saw the source. Terror and accusation washed over their faces in equal measure. The man raised the fire extinguisher, not toward the infected, but toward Leo. His voice, when it came, was a trembling whisper that carried down the hallway like a condemnation. You're doing this. Leo met their gaze, his mind still reeling from the sanity loss, the whispers of cosmic truths echoing in his thoughts. He opened his mouth to explain, to tell them he was trying to help, that he could protect them. But the words died in his throat. How could he explain the interface? The hunger? The visions? They saw only the horror he commanded, and in that moment, he saw it too, through their eyes. He was not a victim. He was the patient zero of a nightmare, and the horde at his side was the proof. The man with glasses raised the fire extinguisher like a club, his knuckles white around the handle. Kill it, he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Kill the monster before it controls more of them. The younger woman with the backpack tightened her grip on the kitchen knife, her eyes darting between Leo and the 3 infected standing motionless behind him. The teenage boy shifted his baseball bat from shoulder to shoulder, breathing heavily through his mouth. The older woman simply stared, her face pale as parchment. Leo backed against the wall, the rough texture of peeling wallpaper digging into his shoulder blades. Carl, the first infected heat controlled, let out a low, wet growl that vibrated through the hallway's stale air. The other two, the woman with fused legs that scraped against the carpet, the man whose vertical maw twitched with anticipation, remained silent sentinels. Leo could feel them through the psychic link, a constant hum at the edge of his consciousness, like static from a broken television. Their hunger was a physical pressure against his thoughts, a gnawing emptiness that mirrored the growing void in his own mind. "We saw what you did," the man with glasses continued, taking a cautious step forward. "You're making them obey you. You're the reason this is happening." Leo wanted to explain, to tell them about the shimmering prompt in his apartment, about the pain of biological overwrite, about the system messages that spoke of cosmic rot and assimilation. But the words caught in his throat. How could he describe the visions? The universe as a living organism, its flesh decaying at the edges, screaming in frequencies no human ear could hear. Earth as a target, a ripe fruit waiting to be consumed by entities whose very existence threatened to unravel his mind. Instead, he focused on the interface. The Eldritch Assimilation Interface floated in his perception, a non-Euclidean overlay against reality. Commands glowed with sickly light: psychic link, Horde command, psychic domination, Horde synergy. He selected Horde command, scatter. The effect was immediate and brutal. A spike of pain drove through Leo's temples, sharp as broken glass. He gasped, his vision swimming with afterimages. The hallway walls pulsed like living tissue, veins of dark energy threading through the plaster. The building's structure revealed itself as something organic, breathing, decaying. He saw the pipes as arteries pumping black fluid, the electrical wires as nerves firing corrupted signals. Reality peeled back for a fraction of a second, and beneath it writhed something hungry and ancient. His infected moved. Carl lunged not at the survivors, but at the nearest apartment door, slamming his body against it with enough force to splinter wood. The woman with fused legs dragged herself to another door, her clawed hands scrabbling at the knob. The man with the vertical maw threw himself against a third, his maw opening wide in a silent scream that shook dust from the ceiling. The survivors froze, their makeshift weapons lowering slightly in confusion. "What are they doing?" the teenage boy asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chaos erupted. From behind the assaulted doors came screams, real, human screams, followed by the sounds of furniture crashing and glass breaking. More infected, freshly turned by the cosmic rot plague, began to emerge. A man with skin peeling away in gray strips stumbled from one apartment. A woman with eyes that had melted into glowing pits crawled from another. They didn't attack Leo or his controlled horde, they moved with mindless hunger toward the nearest source of noise and movement, the group of survivors. Now, Leo thought, pushing through the lingering pain. He broke from the wall and sprinted toward the stairwell door at the end of the hallway. Carl and the other two infected disengaged from the doors, falling in behind him as a ragged escort. The survivors were too busy defending themselves, the man with glasses spraying fire extinguisher foam at a lunging infected, the younger woman slashing with her knife, the boy swinging his bat, to pursue. Leo hit the stairwell door shoulder first, bursting through into the concrete echo chamber of the emergency stairs. The sound of his breathing echoed back at him, too loud, too frantic. He took the steps two at a time, his infected following with unnatural grace. Carl moved with a jerky, efficient motion, while the woman with fused legs used her arms to pull herself down, each movement accompanied by the wet sound of dragging flesh. As he descended, a new message flickered across his interface, glowing with the same sickly light as the commands. Assimilation progress, 0.1%. The words hung in his perception, cold and absolute. 0.1%. A fraction of a percentage point, but it felt like a verdict. How much of the city? How much of the world? The system had a goal, planetary assimilation for alien entities, and it was already underway. Leo's role as Patient Zero wasn't just about survival, he was the catalyst, the starting point of an infection that would consume everything. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the immediate need: escape, establish a base, survive. The subway tunnels. They offered shelter, concealment, potential resources. And distance from the military forces that would surely be responding by now. 4 floors down, he reached the ground level. The stairwell door here was marked with emergency exit signs, the red glow casting long shadows. He paused, listening. Beyond the door, he could hear the sounds of the city, not the normal hum of traffic and life, but something broken. Car alarms wailed in discordant symphony. Glass shattered in the distance. Screams, both human and not, echoed between buildings. Leo took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the door handle. The psychic link hummed, connecting him to his 3 infected. He could feel their hunger, their mindless drive, but beneath that, a thread of control, his control. It was a fragile thing, bought with pieces of his sanity. How much more could he lose before he became like them? Before the cosmic truths the interface revealed consumed what remained of Leo and left only a vessel for the system. He pushed the door open. The street beyond was a vision of collapse. Leo stood in the doorway, his infected clustering behind him, and took in the scene with widening eyes. Cars sat abandoned at odd angles, some with doors hanging open, others crumpled against lampposts or storefronts. A delivery van had plowed into a newspaper kiosk, scattering pages that now fluttered in the breeze like wounded birds. Fires burned in several locations, a trash can belching black smoke, a boutique with flames licking at its display window, a car with its hood engulfed. The air tasted of ash and ozone. And everywhere, the infected. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving through the chaos with the slow, relentless pace of the newly turned. Some stumbled alone, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Others moved in small groups, drawn together by some residual herd instinct. They paid no attention to the fires or the wreckage, their focus was on movement, on sound, on the scent of untainted flesh. Leo's breath caught in his throat. This was no longer contained to his apartment building. The cosmic rot plague had spread, and spread quickly. The city was falling. His eyes scanned the scene, taking in details with a clarity that felt both sharp and distant, another effect of the interface, perhaps. Then he saw it. Across the street, standing near the burning car, was an infected unlike any he'd seen before. It was larger, taller than a man by at least a foot, its body swollen with unnatural growths that bulged against torn clothing. Cracks split its skin from head to toe, glowing with a faint, pulsating light the color of spoiled meat. Its face was a distortion of human features, eyes too far apart, a jaw that hung open to reveal multiple rows of needle-like teeth, a forehead ridged with bony protrusions. But it was the eyes that held Leo. They glowed with the same eldritch light as his own reflection, but where Leo's held fragments of his fading humanity, these burned with intelligent malice. The mutant infected wasn't stumbling mindlessly. It stood still, watching. And its gaze was fixed directly on Leo. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the ruined street. The sounds of the outbreak faded to a background murmur. Leo could feel the psychic link trembling, as if his controlled infected sensed the presence of something greater, something rival. The mutant's lips peeled back in what might have been a smile, revealing more of those needle teeth. Then, slowly, deliberately, it took a step forward. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just another infected. This was something else, a rival mutant, enhanced, intelligent. A direct threat. The interface had mentioned such things in passing, hints of other beings touched by the cosmic rot who retained or gained awareness. But seeing it was different. Seeing it stare at him with recognition and hostility made the reality of his situation crash down with new weight. He was patient zero. But he was not alone in the nightmare. And the true masters of the system, the alien entities driving assimilation, were still out there, waiting. The mutant took another step, its glowing cracks brightening. Leo backed into the stairwell, his mind racing. The subway tunnels. He had to reach them. But first, he had to cross a street full of infected, with that thing watching his every move. He reached for the interface, for the Horde command options. Scatter had worked before, but here, with so many infected, it might cause uncontrollable chaos. He needed precision. He needed to move, and move now. As he prepared to give the order, the mutant across the street raised one clawed hand and pointed directly at him. The gesture was unmistakable, a challenge, a promise. Then it threw back its head and emitted a sound, not a scream, but a deep, vibrating roar that shook the air and made the nearby fires dance wildly. Every infected on the street stopped moving. Every single one. They turned, as one, to look at the mutant. Then, slowly, they turned to look at Leo. Hundreds of eyes, blank and hungry, now fixed on the doorway where he stood. The mutant had their attention. And it had just given them a target. The mutated infected didn't just move, it flowed. Its body, a grotesque mass of pulsating flesh and glowing cracks that seeped violet light, seemed to defy normal physics as it closed the distance between them. Leo had barely registered its roar before it was upon him, moving with a speed that blurred the air around it. Carl, the first infected Leo had ever controlled, stood between them. The man who had once been a neighbor now served as a living shield, his body responding to Leo's instinctual psychic command to protect. But the mutant didn't hesitate. Its arm elongated, bones cracking audibly as it reshaped into a clawed appendage tipped with obsidian-like talons that gleamed under the firelight from nearby wreckage. The attack wasn't a swipe, it was a surgical disassembly. The mutant's claws tore through Carl's torso with a wet, ripping sound that echoed in the sudden silence of the street. Blood and something darker, something that shimmered with the same violet light as the mutant's cracks, sprayed across the asphalt. Carl didn't scream. The connection through the psychic link showed Leo the exact moment when whatever remained of Carl's consciousness simply ceased, replaced by static and then nothingness. Leo staggered back, the psychic feedback hitting him like a physical blow. He tasted copper and something else, something cold and ancient that reminded him of the void between stars. The Eldritch Assimilation Interface flickered in his vision, displaying a notification he didn't have time to read. Carl's body fell in 3 separate pieces, each twitching with residual nerve impulses. The mutant turned its attention to Leo. Its face was a nightmare of fused features, one human eye, wide and terrified, locked in perpetual scream beside 3 smaller, compound eyes that glowed with alien intelligence. Its mouth was a vertical slit that opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth, and when it breathed, the air around it shimmered with heat distortion. Rival mutant, Leo thought, the words forming through the haze of panic. The system's designation made sense now. This wasn't just another infected, this was something that had embraced the cosmic rot, something that understood the interface on a level Leo was only beginning to grasp. It charged again. Leo's remaining 2 infected, the woman with fused legs and the man with the vertical maw, moved to intercept. They were slow, clumsy compared to the mutant's fluid motion. The mutant didn't bother tearing them apart. Instead, it simply passed through them, its body phasing for a moment as if existing in multiple dimensions at once. Where it touched them, their flesh blackened and crumbled into ash that smelled of ozone and decay. 2 more connections severed. 2 more bursts of psychic feedback. Leo's vision doubled. The street before him became 2 overlapping realities, one the burning city with wrecked cars and shattered storefronts, the other a landscape of pulsating organic structures that throbbed in time with some cosmic heartbeat. He saw the buildings not as concrete and steel but as living tissue, their windows like pores weeping fluids he couldn't name. The sky above wasn't sky at all but a membrane stretched taut over something vast and hungry. The mutant was almost upon him. Leo could feel the heat radiating from its glowing cracks, could smell the scent of burnt sugar and rotting flowers that emanated from it. Its claws raised for a killing blow. There was no time for strategy, no time for careful planning. Leo reached into the interface with everything he had, bypassing the basic commands, diving straight for the advanced function he'd only glimpsed in the system's menus. Psychic domination. The command activated not with a thought but with a scream, a psychic scream that tore from Leo's mind and slammed into the mutant's consciousness. The cost was immediate and devastating. Sanity didn't just drain, it hemorrhaged. Leo's perception shattered into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries. He saw angles that shouldn't exist, shapes that folded in on themselves in ways that made his brain ache with the effort of comprehending them. He felt the mutant's mind, a chaotic storm of conflicting impulses. Human memories, a childhood birthday, the taste of coffee, the warmth of a lover's touch, swirled together with alien sensations, the cold vacuum of space, the gravitational pull of black holes, the taste of cosmic radiation. The mutant resisted. Its will was a fortress of madness, built from the same cosmic truths that were tearing Leo apart. Leo felt its intelligence, sharp and malicious, focused entirely on consuming him, on proving itself the superior host of the interface. Images flashed between them, the mutant's vision of a world remade in its image, of humanity turned into cattle to feed its growth, of ascending to become something greater than either human or infected. No, Leo thought, or maybe screamed. He couldn't tell anymore. He pushed harder, pouring more of himself into the domination command. The interface responded, channels opening in his mind that felt like raw nerve endings exposed to vacuum. He saw the system's architecture for a moment, a vast, non-Euclidean network of connections that spanned dimensions, with Earth as just one node among countless others. And at the center of it all, shapes moved in the darkness, entities so vast their mere attention could unravel reality. The mutant's knees buckled. First one, then the other, hitting the asphalt with cracks that echoed the fractures in its own flesh. Its claws dug into the street, carving grooves as it fought the command. The vertical maw opened in a silent scream, and from it poured not sound but light, the same violet light that seeped from its cracks, illuminating the street in pulses that made shadows dance in impossible ways. Leo maintained the connection, his own body trembling with the effort. Blood trickled from his nose, warm and metallic. His eyes, he knew without seeing, were glowing with that same eldritch light he'd seen in his apartment window. The interface displayed warnings in his vision: sanity critical, neural overload imminent, assimilation progress, 0.3%, but he ignored them all. The mutant's head bowed. Its compound eyes dimmed, then went dark. The human eye closed, a single tear cutting through the grime on its cheek. For a moment, Leo saw the man it had been, not a monster, not a rival, but someone just like him, someone who had accepted the interface and been changed by it. Then the moment passed. The mutant went still, kneeling before him like a knight before a king. The psychic connection solidified, different from the simple links he'd formed with the other infected. This was deeper, more intimate. He could feel the mutant's power thrumming through the bond, could access its enhanced senses, could command its unnatural abilities. But the cost? Leo released the domination command, and the world rushed back in with dizzying intensity. He stumbled, catching himself against the burnt-out shell of a sedan. His breath came in ragged gasps. The visions didn't fade entirely, they lingered at the edges of his perception, the organic building still pulsing in his peripheral vision, the membrane sky still stretched taut above. He looked at the mutant, now his to command. It remained kneeling, head bowed, waiting for orders. The glowing cracks in its skin had dimmed to a soft ember glow. Around them, the street was eerily quiet. The other infected had stopped their mindless wandering, all turned toward Leo and his new servant, as if recognizing the shift in hierarchy. Leo took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The subway tunnels. He needed to reach the subway tunnels. That was the plan: establish a hidden base, gather more infected, build something that could survive what was coming. But first, he needed to. The sound cut through the silence before he could finish the thought. A deep, rhythmic thumping that grew rapidly louder. Leo looked up. Military helicopters. 3 of them, black silhouettes against the orange glow of the burning city. They moved with purpose, formation tight, rotors chopping the air with mechanical precision. Searchlights snapped on, brilliant white beams that cut through the smoke and darkness, sweeping across the streets. One of the beams found him. The light was blinding, pinning him in its glare. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, but it was useless. The light seemed to penetrate everything, illuminating not just his body but the psychic connections he'd formed, making them visible as faint violet threads stretching from him to the kneeling mutant and to the ashes of his former horde. A voice boomed from the lead helicopter, amplified by speakers that distorted the words into something harsh and authoritative. Attention, anomalous entity. The mutant stirred at the sound, its head twitching upward. Leo felt its awareness through the bond, a mix of animal aggression and cold calculation. He sent a psychic command to remain still, and the mutant obeyed, though tension thrummed through its body. You are designated Patient Zero. The words hung in the air. Patient Zero. Not a name, not a person, a designation. A problem to be solved. Leo's mind raced. How did they know? How had they identified him so quickly? The interface? The psychic emissions? Or had someone from the apartment building survived to report what they'd seen? The voice continued, merciless in its clarity. Surrender or be eliminated. In the blinding light, Leo saw movement on the rooftops. Shadows resolving into shapes, soldiers in black tactical gear, weapons raised. Red laser dots appeared on his chest, dancing with his heartbeat. More helicopters were approaching from the distance, their lights joining the first in creating a cage of illumination from which there seemed no escape. The mutant tensed further, ready to spring. Leo could feel its power, could sense the destruction it could unleash. But against military forces? Against trained soldiers with advanced weaponry? The mutant was powerful, but it was just one against what looked like an entire response team. And Leo? Leo was exhausted. The psychic domination had drained him more than he'd realized. His thoughts moved through syrup, each one requiring effort. The visions of cosmic truths pressed at the edges of his mind, threatening to overwhelm what little rationality remained. He looked at the kneeling mutant, then up at the helicopters, then at the laser sights painting targets on his body. The subway tunnels were blocks away. The military had him surrounded. And the interface in his mind whispered options he wasn't ready to consider, powers that would cost him what little sanity he had left. The voice repeated, louder this time, as if sensing his hesitation. Final warning. Surrender or be eliminated. Around him, the infected began to stir, drawn by the commotion. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, emerging from alleyways and broken buildings, their attention fixed on the bright lights and loud sounds. But without his command, they were just a mob, not an army. Leo made his decision. The helicopter rotors thundered overhead, their searchlights slicing through the smoke-choked air like celestial blades. Leo didn't wait for the amplified voice to finish its demand for surrender. He moved, his body responding before conscious thought could form, a primal instinct honed by hours of survival in this new world. The mutant followed, its heavy footfalls shaking the pavement, a stark contrast to Leo's silent, desperate sprint. He remembered the subway entrance from his morning commutes, a gaping maw of darkness 50 yards away. The military would have it covered, but they hadn't accounted for the infected already swarming the streets. Leo reached out with his mind, not through the interface's formal commands but through the raw connection he now shared with the mutant. A simple impulse, distract. The mutant roared, a sound that vibrated through Leo's teeth. It charged toward the nearest helicopter, leaping with impossible strength to smash against its undercarriage. The aircraft wobbled, its searchlight jerking wildly as the pilot fought for control. In that moment of chaos, Leo dove into the subway entrance, tumbling down concrete stairs into welcome darkness. The mutant joined him seconds later, landing with a heavy thud that echoed through the abandoned station. Above, the helicopter's roar faded as it pursued other targets, leaving them in relative silence. Leo leaned against a grimy tile wall, breathing hard. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the psychic aftershocks of dominating the mutant. Vision still flickered at the edges of his perception, geometric patterns that defied Euclidean space, whispers that weren't sound but pressure against his consciousness. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing himself to focus on the physical world. The station was a tomb. Flickering emergency lights cast long shadows across the platform, illuminating discarded bags, overturned trash cans, and dark stains that Leo didn't want to examine too closely. The air smelled of ozone, decay, and something else, a metallic tang that reminded him of the interface's notifications. His mutant stood motionless nearby, its glowing cracks providing an eerie bioluminescence that painted the walls in shifting shades of green and violet. Need more, Leo thought. The interface hummed in response, a sensation like cold water trickling down his spine. He didn't activate a formal command, but extended his awareness through the psychic link he now understood intuitively. The station wasn't empty. He could feel them, presences in the darkness, minds reduced to basic impulses, hunger, movement, obedience. Infected, scattered through the tunnels. He focused on the closest one, a presence about 30 yards down the northbound tunnel. Through the interface, he saw it not as a person but as a data point, infected human, baseline, susceptible to command. Leo reached out with his will, a gentle but firm pressure. Come. The infected emerged from the shadows minutes later, a man in torn business attire, one arm hanging at an unnatural angle. His eyes were milky white, his movements jerky but purposeful as he approached Leo and stood beside the mutant. No fight, no resistance. Just instant compliance. Leo felt a faint tug at his sanity, like a thread being pulled from a tapestry. The vision came, he saw the tunnel not as concrete and steel, but as a pulsing organic tube, its walls breathing slowly, rhythmically. He blinked, and it was just a tunnel again. One by one, he called them. A woman in hospital scrubs, her face half melted into something crystalline. A teenager with elongated fingers that scraped against the platform tiles. An older man whose jaw had split vertically into a maw lined with needle-like teeth. Each addition to his horde cost him, not much individually, but cumulatively, the visions piled up. He saw the city above as a living organism, its buildings like bony growths, its streets veins pumping with dark energy. He saw Earth from orbit, a pale blue dot being slowly enveloped by tendrils of cosmic rot. Each glimpse lasted only seconds, but they lingered in his mind like afterimages from a blinding light. By the time he had 12 infected gathered around him, his head throbbed with a migraine that felt both physical and metaphysical. The interface displayed their status in his peripheral vision: Horde, 13 units, synergy potential, low. The mutant remained separate in the listing, marked as Alpha Unit, enhanced. Move, Leo whispered, his voice hoarse. They obeyed as one, following him deeper into the tunnels. The mutant took point, its glowing cracks providing just enough light to navigate by. The others shuffled behind, a silent procession through the underworld. The air grew colder, damper. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. Leo's own hunger stirred, not for food, but for the psychic energy that seemed to radiate from the infected around him. The interface whispered promises of power if he just reached out and took it, but he clenched his fists and pushed the thoughts away. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached a maintenance section marked by faded yellow paint on the walls. A heavy metal door stood slightly ajar, leading to a room about the size of a small apartment. Inside, Leo found generators long since dead, tool cabinets rusted shut, and, most importantly, thick steel beams and spare track components piled in one corner. The room had only two entrances, the door they'd come through and a smaller service hatch on the opposite wall. This could work, he thought. If we can secure it. He turned to his horde, studying them in the mutants' eerie light. They stood waiting, their faces blank, their bodies tense with unnatural stillness. The interface offered him options: Horde Command, Patrol, Horde Command, Guard, Horde Command, Scatter. But at the bottom of the list, glowing with faint promise, was Horde Synergy, Coordinated Action. He'd never used it before, but the description was clear: it would allow the infected to work together with precision beyond their individual capabilities. Leo hesitated. Every command cost sanity. Every glimpse into the cosmic truths behind this plague chipped away at what remained of Leo, the ordinary man who'd once worried about rent and deadlines. But survival demanded payment. He selected the command. Immediately, the world shifted. The room didn't just brighten, it unfolded. The walls became transparent, revealing layers of reality beneath. The concrete was laced with shimmering veins of energy that pulsed in time with some distant heartbeat. The air thickened with invisible currents that flowed toward him, toward his horde, feeding the connection between them. Leo saw the infected not as individuals but as nodes in a network, their psychic signatures intertwining into a single cohesive pattern. The mutant was the anchor point, its enhanced biology acting as a conduit for his will. Through this expanded awareness, Leo directed them. Barricade the main door. Reinforce the hatch. Create a perimeter. The infected moved with unsettling coordination. The mutant lifted a steel beam that must have weighed half a ton, carrying it to the main door while two baseline infected position support brackets. Others gathered smaller debris, piling it strategically to create choke points. They worked without communication, without hesitation, a single organism with 13 bodies. Leo watched, fascinated and horrified. This was power. Real power. The kind that could build fortresses, command armies, reshape the world. And the cost? The visions intensified. The tunnel system around him revealed itself as a vast network of cosmic veins, pumping not blood but eldritch energy toward some central heart. He saw glimpses of the interface's architecture, not code, but living thought patterns woven into reality itself. Alien mathematics scrolled behind his eyes, equations that described the universe as a consumable resource. His headache spiked into something blinding, and he stumbled against a tool cabinet, gripping its edge until his knuckles turned white. When the command completed, the room was secure. The main door was barred with multiple layers of metal, the hatch reinforced, and the infected positioned at defensive points. The interface updated, base established, designation, primary sanctuary. Horde Synergy, active, efficiency, 78%. Leo sank to the floor, breathing heavily. The visions receded, leaving behind only echoes and the persistent throb in his temples. He'd done it. He had a base, a horde, a semblance of safety. For the first time since the outbreak began, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Then the interface flashed crimson. A notification appeared, not in his peripheral vision but directly in the center of his sight, impossible to ignore. The text glowed with malevolent certainty. Primary objective, planetary assimilation. Status, conduit preparation required. Entity arrival, pending. Estimated timeframe, 14 days. Leo stared at the words, his blood running cold. Conduit preparation. Entity arrival. 14 days. The satisfaction evaporated, replaced by a dread so profound it felt like physical weight on his chest. This wasn't just a plague. It wasn't just survival. The interface had a purpose, and he was the instrument. Before he could process it further, a sound cut through the silence of the tunnels. Faint at first, then growing clearer, human cries. Not screams of terror, but desperate shouts, calls for help. They came from deeper in the tunnel system, maybe 100 yards away. A group of survivors, trapped. His hunger stirred immediately, a deep, visceral pull toward the psychic energy they represented. Fresh minds, untainted by the interface, would be potent. His horde reacted too, the infected shifted restlessly, low growls echoing in the confined space. The mutant's glowing cracks brightened, its head tilting toward the sound with predatory interest. But beneath the hunger, something else stirred. A memory, holding the door for a stranger at his old office building. Helping a neighbor carry groceries up the stairs. Small, human kindnesses that felt like artifacts from another life. The cries weren't just noise, they were people. Terrified, trapped people. Leo stood slowly, his body aching. He looked at his horde, at the mutant whose will he had broken, at the barricaded door that represented his fragile sanctuary. Then he looked toward the darkness where the cries originated. His remaining humanity whispered of rescue, of protection, of being something more than patient zero. His hunger, amplified by the interface, whispered of power, of growth, of survival at any cost. The cries came again, closer now. Is anyone there? Please. His horde growled in unison, a sound of eager anticipation. Leo stood at the crossroads, the weight of his choice pressing down on him as the cosmic whispers grew louder in his mind. The subway tunnel stretched into darkness, its air thick with the scent of damp concrete and something fouler, the metallic tang of blood mixed with the sweet rot of decay. Leo moved through the shadows, his footsteps silent on the grime-coated tracks. Beside him, the mutant alpha kept pace, its heavy breathing a low rumble that echoed off the curved walls. Glowing cracks pulsed along its skin like veins of molten amber, casting flickering light that danced across graffiti-scarred tiles and abandoned maintenance equipment. Leo's mind felt raw, scraped thin by the visions that had come with each command. The horde synergy from earlier still lingered, a phantom sensation of 12 minds moving as one, their thoughts a dull chorus of hunger and obedience. He could feel them now, his baseline infected, stationed at strategic points throughout the tunnel network. They were extensions of his will, their presence a constant hum in the back of his skull. But that hum came with a price, every connection whispered fragments of cosmic truths, glimpses of geometries that twisted reality into impossible shapes. He saw the tunnels not as man-made passages but as cosmic veins, pulsing with eldritch energy that flowed toward some unseen heart. He blinked, forcing the vision away, his fingers tightening around a rusted pipe he'd picked up as a makeshift weapon. The faint cries he'd heard earlier grew clearer now, human voices, sharp with panic. They came from up ahead, where a stalled train car lay partially derailed, its windows shattered and doors hanging open like broken jaws. Leo slowed, his senses heightened by the interface. He could feel the infected nearby, drawn to the noise like moths to flame. A dozen of them, maybe more, shuffling in the darkness around the train. Their hunger was a palpable force, a gnawing emptiness that resonated with his own. His stomach twisted, a familiar ache that reminded him of the plague's curse, the constant, insatiable need to consume. He gritted his teeth, pushing the hunger down. It was easier now, with the mutant alpha under his control. The creature's presence was an anchor, a focus for his will. He peered around a support column, taking in the scene. The train car was a relic of the old system, its yellow paint peeling to reveal rust beneath. Inside, he could see movement, figures huddled together, their shapes silhouetted against the dim light filtering through broken windows. 5 of them, he counted. A man with glasses pressed against a window, his face pale with terror. A younger woman clutching a backpack to her chest, a kitchen knife glinting in her hand. A teenage boy with a baseball bat raised defensively. An older woman crouched low, her hands over her ears. And a 5th, a woman in stained medical scrubs, her eyes scanning the darkness with clinical intensity. The infected surrounded the car, their forms shuffling and twitching in the shadows. They were baseline units, recently turned, their features still recognizably human but distorted by the cosmic rot. One had a jaw that hung too low, another with fingers elongated into claws. They pressed against the train, their moans a chorus of mindless need. The survivors inside were trapped, their voices rising in desperate shouts. "Stay back," the man with glasses yelled, brandishing a fire extinguisher he'd pulled from the wall. His voice cracked with fear. The younger woman with the backpack slashed her knife through the air as an infected hand reached through a broken window. They're everywhere. Leo watched, his mind racing. He could command his horde to attack, to clear the infected away in a burst of violence. But that would cost sanity, and the visions that came with it were becoming harder to shake. He remembered the system alert from earlier, primary objective, planetary assimilation, and a cold dread settled in his gut. These people were resources, not just prey. Information. Protection. A bargain. He stepped into the open, the mutant alpha at his side. The creature's presence was immediate and terrifying. Its glowing cracks brightened, casting long, distorted shadows that made the infected pause in their assault. The survivors froze, their eyes widening as they took in Leo and his monstrous companion. The man with glasses stumbled back, dropping the fire extinguisher with a clatter. The younger woman's knife wavered, her knuckles white. "Don't come closer," the teenage boy shouted, his voice trembling. He raised the baseball bat, but his arms shook. Leo raised a hand, palm out. A gesture of peace, though he felt anything but peaceful. The hunger stirred again, a visceral pull toward the warm, living bodies in the train car. He could almost taste their fear, a sharp, coppery flavor on the back of his tongue. He forced himself to focus, to reach for the interface. It responded sluggishly, a cold presence in his mind that unfurled like a dead thing stirring to life. He didn't use psychic domination. That was for overriding wills, for breaking minds. These people were already broken by fear. Instead, he tapped into something subtler, a whisper of influence, a suggestion woven into the fabric of their terror. The interface offered it, psychic suggestion. A command to calm, to trust. He seized it, feeling the cost immediately. A sharp pain lanced through his temples, and the world wavered. The tunnel walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like a living organ. He saw the survivors not as individuals but as puppets, their emotion strings he could pluck and twist. The sensation was sickening, a violation that scraped at the edges of his humanity. But he pushed through, directing the suggestion toward the 5 figures in the train car. "I'm not here to hurt you," Leo said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. He kept his distance, letting the mutant alpha stand as a silent guardian. "I can help." The survivors' panic didn't vanish, but it softened. The man with glasses lowered his hands, his breathing slowing. The younger woman's grip on her knife loosened slightly. They looked at Leo, their expressions a mix of confusion and wary hope. The doctor in scrubs stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. She had a sharp, analytical gaze that missed nothing. "You're controlling them," she said, her voice low. She gestured to the infected around the train, who had stopped their advance and now stood listlessly, swaying in place. Leo's subtle command had extended to them too, a hold order, keeping them at bay. Leo nodded. "For now. But we don't have much time. The military is out there, and they're not friendly. They see me as the source of all this." The teenage boy lowered his bat, his shoulders slumping. "We heard the broadcasts. They're setting up blockades. Shoot on-site orders for anyone infected." "And for you?" the man with glasses asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Especially for me," Leo said. He could feel the interface humming in his skull, a constant reminder of his connection to the plague. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the negotiation. "I need information. What's happening out there? Where are the blockades? Are there others like me?" The survivors exchanged glances. The older woman spoke for the first time, her voice raspy with exhaustion. "We were trying to reach the evacuation points. But the streets are overrun. We saw things infected that moved too fast, too smart." One of them spoke. It said it was hunting for the source. Leo's blood ran cold. Rival mutants. Intelligent, malicious. He'd faced one already, and it had nearly killed him. The thought of more out there, hunting him, sent a chill down his spine. He pushed the fear down, locking it away with the hunger. "Tell me everything," he said. Over the next hour, they talked. The survivors huddled in the relative safety of the train car, while Leo stood guard outside, his horde keeping a perimeter. The mutant alpha remained at his side, a silent, terrifying presence that kept both the infected and the survivors in check. The man with glasses, his name was David, detailed the military movements he'd seen from a high-rise window before fleeing. Blockades on major bridges, checkpoints at subway exits. Helicopters patrolling the skies, their searchlights cutting through the smoke. The younger woman, Mia, spoke of rumors from other survivors she'd encountered in fleeting, desperate encounters. Whispers of infected who retained their minds, who led packs of their own. Some said they were building territories, fighting each other for control. Others claimed they were working with the military, trading information for amnesty. None of it was confirmed, but the possibilities hung in the air like a threat. The teenage boy, Jake, added bits and pieces, the sounds of distant gunfire, the collapse of communication networks. The older woman, Eleanor, simply listened, her eyes hollow with trauma. Throughout it all, the doctor watched Leo. Her name was Anya, and she had been a researcher at a nearby hospital before the outbreak. She asked pointed questions about his symptoms, his control over the infected, the nature of the interface. Leo answered carefully, omitting the cosmic truths, the sanity erosion. He spoke of it as a system, a tool. But he could see the skepticism in her eyes. "You're offering protection," Anya said finally, cutting through the conversation. "In exchange for information. What's to stop you from turning on us once you have what you want?" Leo met her gaze. "Nothing. But I'm not the only threat out there. The military will shoot you on sight if they think you're infected. The rival mutants will tear you apart for sport. With me, you have a chance. I can keep the infected away. I can get you to safety." "What safety?" David asked, his voice bitter. "There is no safety. There's my base," Leo said. He gestured down the tunnel, toward the maintenance room he'd secured. "It's hidden. Barricaded. We can fortify it further. Gather supplies. Wait out the worst of it." The survivors fell silent, considering. Leo could feel the weight of their decision, the fear of the unknown versus the certainty of death outside. He kept the psychic suggestion active, a gentle pressure on their minds urging them toward trust. It was a delicate balance, like holding a fraying rope. Each moment cost him a sliver of sanity. Visions flickered at the edges of his perception, the train car as a cocoon, the survivors as larvae waiting to be consumed by a greater hunger. He pushed them back, his knuckles white around the rusted pipe. Finally, Anya nodded. "We'll go with you. But on one condition. Let me examine you. I need to understand what you are. What this interface is doing to you." Leo hesitated. The thought of being studied, of having his secrets laid bare, was unsettling. But he needed their cooperation. And part of him, the part that was still human, wanted to know too. What was he becoming? He nodded slowly. They moved cautiously through the tunnels, Leo leading the way with the mutant alpha clearing a path. His horde fell in around them, a silent escort that made the survivors flinch with every twitch and moan. The journey to the maintenance room was tense, filled with the sounds of dripping water and distant screams. But they made it without incident, the barricaded door a welcome sight. Inside, the room was as Leo had left it, a cramped space filled with tools and old machinery, now reinforced with debris dragged by the infected. The survivors settled warily, their eyes darting between Leo and the mutant standing guard at the door. Anya wasted no time. She pulled a small medical kit from her backpack, her movements efficient and precise. "I need a blood sample," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Leo rolled up his sleeve, exposing his forearm. The skin was pale, marked with faint, spiderweb-like veins that seemed to pulse with a light only he could see. Anya cleaned a spot with an alcohol swab, her fingers cool against his skin. She pricked his finger with a lancet, collecting a drop of blood on a glass slide. Leo watched as she set up a portable microscope she'd salvaged from the hospital. She adjusted the lenses, her expression focused. For a long moment, she was silent, her eyes glued to the eyepiece. Then she gasped, a sharp intake of breath that echoed in the quiet room. David looked up from where he was sorting through a pile of canned food. "What is it?" Anya didn't answer immediately. She straightened, her face pale. She looked at Leo, her eyes wide with something that wasn't quite fear, but awe, and horror. "Your blood, it's not human. Not anymore." Leo felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Anya gestured for him to look. He leaned over the microscope, his heart pounding. The world narrowed to the circle of light, to the tiny droplet of his blood magnified 100-fold. What he saw stole the breath from his lungs. The red cells were there, but they swam in a sea of something else, swirling, shifting patterns that defied geometry. They moved like liquid crystal, forming and reforming into shapes that hurt to look at, spirals that turned in on themselves, angles that existed in more than 3 dimensions. It was alive in a way blood shouldn't be, pulsing with a faint, inner light that matched the glow of the mutant's cracks. Anya's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the sudden roar in Leo's ears. "You're not just infected," she said. "You're becoming something else entirely." The maintenance room hummed with the low, guttural breathing of 13 infected bodies. Leo stood at the center, his back pressed against the cold metal of a utility cabinet. The 5 survivors huddled in the far corner, their eyes darting between him and the motionless horde. David adjusted his glasses nervously, while Mia clutched her backpack straps. Anya watched Leo with clinical detachment, her medical scrub stained with subway grime. Leo closed his eyes, feeling the Eldritch Assimilation Interface pulsing behind his temples. It wasn't a physical sensation, more like a pressure, a presence that whispered in frequencies just beyond human hearing. The system messages scrolled through his mind's eye, crisp and alien in their formatting. System alert, Horde units idle. Recommend tactical deployment. Primary objective, planetary assimilation. Conduit preparation, 0.7% complete. He ignored the assimilation percentage. The number made his stomach twist. Instead, he focused on the map of psychic connections, 13 threads of consciousness, 12 simple and hungry, 1 complex and dangerous. The mutant alpha stood nearest to him, its mutated form casting a distorted shadow on the concrete wall. Leo had named it nothing. Names implied familiarity, and this thing was anything but familiar. We need to know what's out there, Leo thought, the decision crystallizing. The survivors' information about military blockades was hours old. In this new world, hours meant everything. He reached out psychically, selecting 6 of the baseline infected. Their minds were simple things: hunger, movement, obedience. Like tuning radio stations, he found their frequencies and issued the command, *scout. Observe. Return, *. The infected stirred. 6 figures detached from the horde, moving with the jerky, efficient gait of the cosmic rot plague. They didn't look at the survivors as they filed out of the maintenance room, disappearing into the dark subway tunnel beyond the barricaded door. Leo kept his eyes closed, maintaining the psychic link. Through their senses, he experienced the tunnel as they did, a world of scent trails and thermal gradients. The infected navigated by the smell of decay and the faint warmth of distant machinery. They moved as a unit, their simple minds networked through Leo's control. After 20 minutes of winding through maintenance passages and abandoned platforms, they found an emergency exit. Rusted stairs led upward to a metal door propped slightly ajar. Daylight filtered through the crack, harsh and alien after hours in the tunnels. Leo pushed the command, "Proceed with caution." The first infected nudged the door open with its shoulder. The sudden flood of sensory data hit Leo like a physical blow. Through 6 pairs of eyes, he saw the blockade. It wasn't just a checkpoint. It was a fortress. The military had transformed the intersection above the subway exit into a killing field. Sandbag emplacements formed a semicircle around the subway entrance, manned by soldiers in full hazmat suits. Their visors reflected the gray morning light, turning them into faceless, insectoid figures. Beyond them, 2 main battle tanks sat with their barrels trained on the subway entrance. The tanks' engines idled with a low rumble that vibrated through the infected's feet. Leo counted 30 soldiers at minimum. More moved in the buildings flanking the intersection, their silhouettes visible in broken windows. Snipers. He could feel their presence through the infected's primitive threat detection, a prickling awareness of being watched. He needed more detail. The interface offered the ability, Horde perception available. Share sensory data across networked units. Warning, prolonged use accelerates sanity degradation. Leo hesitated. The last time he'd pushed his psychic abilities, he'd seen things, geometries that shouldn't exist, truths that unraveled reality. But he needed to know the blockade's weaknesses. He couldn't plan without seeing everything. He activated Horde perception. The world exploded into overlapping sensations. Through one infected, he saw the precise arrangement of sandbags, a gap between 2 emplacements where the covering fire would be weakest. Through another, he smelled the soldiers' fierce sweat beneath their hazmat suits, the acrid scent of adrenaline. A third registered the thermal signatures, the tank's engines glowed hottest, the soldiers' bodies warm pockets in the cool air. But the cost came immediately. Leo's vision doubled. The maintenance room faded, replaced by a dizzying collage of perspectives. He was simultaneously watching the blockade from 6 angles, feeling the infected's relentless hunger for flesh, tasting the soldiers' fear on the air like copper. The sensations overlapped, merged, became something greater than the sum of their parts, and in that merging, reality began to fray. He saw the soldiers not just as humans, but as temporary arrangements of matter. Their hazmat suits became translucent, revealing the swirling chaos of their biology beneath. The tanks weren't machines, but collections of vibrating particles held in temporary alignment. And beneath it all, he felt the city's bones. The subway tunnels weren't just tunnels, but cosmic veins as the interface had called them, pulsing with the same eldritch energy that flowed through him. Sanity degradation, 3.2%. Cumulative total, 41.7%. The number flashed in his mind, cold and precise. Leo gritted his teeth, forcing himself to maintain the connection. He needed the information. He mapped the blockade in his mind, the weak point between sandbags, the sniper positions, the tank firing arcs. He noted everything: ammunition crates stacked too close to a fuel drum, a communications officer separated from the main group, a section of fencing that had been hastily repaired with weaker materials. But the longer he held the connection, the more the cosmic truths bled through. The soldier's fear wasn't just emotion. It was a frequency, a vibration that resonated with something deeper. Leo realized with dawning horror that their terror was feeding the interface somehow, nourishing the cosmic rot. The more they feared him, the stronger the plague became. It was a feedback loop of existential dread. And the infected's hunger, it wasn't for flesh alone. Through the Horde perception, Leo felt their true desire: assimilation. They wanted to consume not just bodies, but consciousness. To pull every thinking mind into the Horde network, into the interface, into the waiting embrace of whatever entities had created this system. He broke the connection. Leo staggered backward, colliding with the utility cabinet. The metal rang with the impact. In the corner, the survivors jumped. Jake raised his baseball bat. "What happened?" David asked, his voice tight. Leo didn't answer immediately. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. The maintenance room snapped back into focus, but it looked different now. He could still see the faint pulsing of the cosmic veins in the walls, the subtle wrongness in the angles where concrete met metal. The interface had rewired his perception permanently. Blockade, Leo managed. 30 soldiers minimum. Tanks. Snipers. He described what he'd seen, leaving out the cosmic revelations. The survivors listened, their faces growing paler with each detail. When he mentioned the weak point between sandbags, Mia's eyes lit up. "We could create a diversion," she said. "Draw their attention, slip through the gap." Leo considered it. He could send the Horde, all 13 of them, in a frontal assault. The mutant Alpha alone might take out a tank if it got close enough. The chaos would create an opening. He could get the survivors out, maybe even secure vehicles or supplies. But he hesitated. The military had identified him as Patient Zero. They weren't just containing an outbreak, they were hunting him specifically. A diversionary attack would confirm his location. They'd bring everything down on the subway system. Artillery. Airstrikes. They'd collapse the tunnels rather than let him escape. And there was another consideration: the cost. Sending the Horde into that kill zone would mean losing most of them. Each infected was a piece of his power, a node in his network. Losing them would weaken him, make him more vulnerable to rival mutants. And controlling them in combat would cost more sanity, he'd see more truths, unravel more of his mind. He stood there, trapped between options. Attack and risk annihilation. Stay hidden and slowly starve as supplies dwindled. The survivors watched him, waiting for a decision. The Horde waited too, their simple minds ready for his command. Then the mutant Alpha twitched. It wasn't a normal movement. The creature's head tilted, as if listening to something only it could hear. Its mutated arm, a mass of fused bone and tendon, flexed involuntarily. Leo felt it through their psychic link. A disturbance in the Horde network. A foreign presence, brushing against the edges of his control. He focused on the mutant, using their enhanced connection to amplify his own senses. The mutant's perceptions were sharper than the baseline infected. It could hear heartbeats at 50 yards, smell specific individuals across a city block. And right now, it was detecting something else. Another psychic signature. Not human. Not his infected. Something different. Something that broadcast on the same frequencies as the interface, but with a different modulation. The signal was faint, coming from somewhere to the north, but growing stronger. Leo concentrated, pushing through the mutant senses. The world resolved into a landscape of psychic impressions. He felt the survivors as bright points of fear and hope. His Horde as obedient nodes. The soldiers above as a buzzing cloud of aggression. And then he felt it clearly, another mind, vast and arrogant, reaching across the psychic spectrum. The contact wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. A probe, testing his defenses. And with it came a message, not in words but in pure psychic intent, a challenge, a declaration of dominance, a promise of consumption. The mind behind the signal felt ancient and hungry. It saw Leo not as an equal, but as a resource to be harvested. Its thoughts swirled with cosmic arrogance, with the certainty of something that had consumed worlds before this one. And it was coming closer. Leo broke the connection, his breath catching. The mutant alpha growled low in its throat, the sound echoing in the confined space. The baseline infected stirred, sensing their alpha's agitation. "What is it?" Anya asked, her doctor's instincts recognizing his distress. Leo didn't answer. He was still processing what he'd felt. A rival. Not just another infected, but another intelligent one. Another patient zero? Or something worse? The interface had mentioned rival mutants in its alerts, but this felt different. This felt like competition for the title of conduit. For the right to prepare the world for the entity's arrival. He looked at the survivors, then at his horde, then at the ceiling where the military waited with tanks and sniper rifles. Trapped between two threats, with a third now announcing its approach. The cosmic veins in the walls seemed to pulse faster, as if in anticipation. The choice was no longer just about the blockade. It was about which enemy to face first, and whether he'd have enough sanity left to face the second. The psychic assault hit Leo like a physical blow. One moment he was analyzing the military blockade data through his mutant alpha senses, the next a wave of alien whispers flooded his mind. They weren't words in any human language but concepts: hunger, dominion, cosmic indifference, wrapped in psychic static that made his teeth ache. His 12 baseline infected, previously standing in orderly ranks around the maintenance room, began twitching violently. One of them, a former subway worker whose uniform hung in tatters, let out a guttural scream and slammed its head against a concrete wall. Another, a woman missing an arm, started clawing at its own face with jagged nails. Control breaking, the interface flashed in his vision, the text shimmering with non-Euclidean geometries that hurt to look at. External psychic interference detected. Source, rival alpha designation, the architect. Leo staggered, catching himself against the metal workbench where Anya's microscope still sat. The survivors huddled in the corner, David clutching his glasses, Mia gripping her backpack straps, Jake white-knuckling his baseball bat, Eleanor praying silently, Anya watching Leo with clinical concern. They couldn't hear the psychic assault, but they saw its effects. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something like rotting stars. Through the chaos, Leo glimpsed the rival's mind. Not as a coherent image but as impressions, a laboratory coat stained with black ichor, multiple limbs moving with unnatural precision, eyes that saw in wavelengths beyond human perception. The architect. The name came with the psychic contact, along with arrogance so profound it felt like gravity. "You are inefficient," the whispers coalesced into something almost language. "Your hesitation feeds the system's hunger. Let me show you proper control." Another wave hit, this one sharper. Two of Leo's baseline infected broke free entirely, turning on each other with feral rage. Their psychic tethers, those thin silver threads only Leo could see, snapped like overtuned violin strings. The sound echoed in his skull. Sanity, 38.5%. The interface displayed the number in pulsing crimson. Each percentage point lost felt like a piece of his mind being scraped away with a rusty spoon. He could feel the cosmic truths waiting just beyond that barrier, truths that would unravel everything he understood about reality. "Psychic shield," Leo commanded through gritted teeth. The interface responded instantly. A barrier of pure will erupted from his mind, visible only to his psychic senses as a shimmering dome of silver energy. It pushed back against the architect's assault, but maintaining it was like holding up a collapsing building. The cost appeared in his vision. Sanity drain, minus 4.2%. Current sanity, 34.3%. For a terrible moment, Leo saw through the shield. Not the maintenance room, not the terrified survivors or his agitated horde, but the truth behind the interface. The subway tunnels weren't just tunnels, they were conduits, veins pumping with eldritch energy that flowed from some unimaginable source. The infected weren't just plague victims, they were nodes in a network, their consciousness being slowly digested to power something vast and hungry. And the architect. Leo saw the rival clearly now. A man once, a scientist perhaps, now transformed into something with 6 limbs ending in surgical precision tools, a face that had melted and reformed into a mask of cold calculation. But beneath that transformation, Leo saw the same silver threads that connected him to his horde. The same interface. The same entities pulling the strings. "We're both puppets," Leo whispered, the realization tasting like ash. The architect's psychic presence recoiled slightly, as if offended by the concept. "Puppets have masters. I am becoming the master. Another assault, this one focused. The architect wasn't trying to break Leo's control anymore, it was trying to rewrite it. To make Leo's horde its own. The psychic pressure intensified, threatening to crack Leo's shield. Domination feedback, Leo gasped, the command tearing from him almost against his will. This was different from psychic shield. This wasn't defense, this was turning the attack back on itself. The interface flared with warnings. Warning, domination feedback requires embracing cosmic resonance patterns. Sanity cost, variable. Minimum, -8%. Maximum, -15%. Confirm. Leo didn't hesitate. He couldn't. If the architect took his horde, the survivors would die. He'd die. Everything he'd built would become part of some mad scientist's experiment in cosmic domination. He confirmed. The world dissolved. For 3 heartbeats that stretched into eternity, Leo didn't exist as Leo. He was a conduit for something ancient and hungry. He saw the architect not as a rival mutant but as a puppet, a beautifully crafted, intelligent puppet, but a puppet nonetheless. The same silver threads that connected Leo to his horde connected the architect to something else, something vast that watched from beyond the stars with too many eyes. You see, the entities seemed to whisper through him. All is connection. All is consumption. Resistance is inefficient. Leo screamed. Not with his mouth, that was frozen in a rictus of agony, but with his mind. He took the architect's psychic assault, wrapped it in the cosmic truths he'd been resisting, and hurled it back. The feedback hit the architect like a physical blow across dimensions. Through their connection, Leo felt the rival's shock, then pain, then something worse, recognition. The architect saw what Leo had seen. Saw its own strings. Impossible, the architect's psychic voice cracked. The system favors efficiency. I am efficiency. But the doubt was there. The crack in its arrogance. The architect retreated, its psychic presence withdrawing so rapidly it left psychic vacuum that made Leo's ears pop. Silence. Then the aftermath. Leo collapsed to his knees, vomiting black ichor that smelled of ozone and forgotten stars. His hands trembled violently. The interface displayed the damage. Sanity drain from domination feedback, -12.7%. Current sanity, 21.6%. He was below a quarter. The number glowed with ominous finality. At this level, the interface warned, permanent cognitive degradation was probable. Cosmic truths would begin bleeding into his waking moments without psychic commands to trigger them. His horde settled, the 2 that had broken control now lying motionless, their minds shattered by the psychic crossfire. 10 baseline infected remained, plus the mutant alpha who watched Leo with something approaching concern in its milky eyes. The survivors rushed forward. Anya reached him first, her medical training overriding her fear. She checked his pulse, her fingers cold against his feverish skin. Your heart rate is, impossible, she whispered. Over 200 beats per minute, but your blood pressure is dropping. This isn't human physiology anymore. What was that? David asked, helping Leo sit up against the workbench. We couldn't hear anything but, the air felt wrong. My fillings hurt. Rival, Leo managed through clenched teeth. The word came out garbled, his mouth not quite working right. Another like me. But, different philosophy. Philosophy? Mia hugged her backpack like a life preserver. This is about philosophy now. How to use the power, Leo said, each word an effort. It wants efficiency. Consumption. I want, something else. He didn't say, salvation. The word felt too heavy, too presumptuous for someone whose sanity was crumbling like old parchment. Jake pointed at the ceiling. Do you hear that? They all fell silent. At first, nothing. Then a low rumble that grew steadily louder. Not the subway trains, those had stopped running days ago. This was different. Deeper. More purposeful. Military, Eleanor said, her voice trembling. They found us. Leo tried to access horde perception, to see through his remaining scout's eyes. The effort made his vision swim with fractal patterns. He caught glimpses, soldiers pointing at seismic readings, officers shouting orders, someone with colonel's insignia giving a decisive nod. Then the world exploded. The missile strike hit the subway entrance 300 yards away, but in the confined tunnels, distance meant nothing. The concussion wave hit first, a wall of air that slammed into the maintenance room like a physical fist. The metal door blew off its hinges, clattering across the floor. Tools flew from the workbench. Anya's microscope shattered against the wall. Then the sound, a deafening roar that went on, deeper than thunder, the sound of the earth itself being torn open. Dust poured through the doorway, thick and choking. Leo's infected coughed, a horrible wet sound, but the survivors were worse. David gasped, clawing at his throat. Mia fumbled in her backpack for water, but the bottle had shattered. Jake beat at the dust with his baseball bat as if he could fight it. Ceiling! Anya shouted. Above them, the concrete cracked. Not little cracks, great jagged fissures that spread like lightning across the ceiling. Chunks of concrete began to fall, first pebbles, then fist-sized pieces. Back! Get back! Leo ordered, his voice raw. They retreated to the far corner as the ceiling directly above the workbench collapsed. A slab of concrete the size of a car crashed down, crushing the bench and everything on it. More followed in a cascade of dust and debris. When it stopped, the maintenance room was half its previous size. The doorway was completely buried under tons of rubble. The air grew thick with concrete dust that caught in their throats and stung their eyes. Worse than the dust was the silence that followed. Not true silence, there was the trickle of falling pebbles, the groan of stressed metal, the ragged breathing of 13 infected and 5 humans, but the absence of the city sounds that had filtered through even this deep. No distant sirens. No hum of generators. Nothing. Leo activated the interface's environmental scan, not caring about the sanity cost. The display flickered, damaged by the psychic battle or the physical one, he couldn't tell. Air quality, deteriorating. Oxygen content, 18% and falling. Escape routes, 0 identified. Estimated time to asphyxiation, 2 to 4 hours. The numbers hung in his vision, cold and final. He looked at the survivors, David helping Eleanor to her feet, Mia checking Jake for injuries, Anya already assessing their limited supplies with a doctor's efficiency. He looked at his horde, 10 baseline infected watching him with blank hunger, the mutant alpha tilting its head as if listening to something only it could hear. He looked at the rubble that sealed them in, at the cracks still spreading across the remaining ceiling, at the dust settling like a shroud over everything. 2 to 4 hours. The architect was gone, driven off by the domination feedback. The military had made their move, collapsing the tunnels rather than risk sending soldiers in. And Leo. Leo sat in the growing dark, his sanity at 21.6%, his air running out, his choices narrowing to nothing. Dust hung in the air like a permanent fog, thick enough to taste, a gritty mixture of pulverized concrete, rust, and something else, something organic that made Leo's stomach twist. The maintenance room, once his hidden sanctuary, was now a tomb in the making. Dim emergency lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the crumpled metal lockers and overturned medical supplies. Every breath came with effort, the air growing heavy and stale, carrying the scent of fierce sweat and blood. Leo coughed, the sound echoing in the confined space. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, the aftermath of the psychic battle with the architect. Sanity sat at 21.6%, a number that flashed in his mind's eye like a warning siren. He could feel the interface humming at the edge of his consciousness, a cold, alien presence waiting to feed on his unraveling mind. Across the room, the survivors huddled together. David, the man with glasses, pressed a hand against a bleeding gash on his forehead, his glasses cracked and smeared. Mia clutched her backpack like a lifeline, her knuckles white around the handle of her kitchen knife. Jake leaned against a wall, baseball bat resting across his knees, his teenage face pale with shock. Eleanor sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes darted nervously toward the collapsed tunnel entrance. Anya, the doctor, moved among them with practiced efficiency, her medical scrub stained with dust and blood. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve to bandage David's wound, her hands trembling slightly. "The air's getting worse," Mia whispered, her voice tight. "How long do we have?" Leo didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes, reaching out through the psychic link to his horde. 10 baseline infected and the mutant alpha waited in the tunnel beyond the rubble, their minds a low buzz of hunger and obedience. He could feel their confusion, their agitation at the collapse. Through their senses, he assessed the blockage, a jagged wall of concrete, twisted rebar, and shattered tiles, sealing them in completely. 2 to 4 hours, Leo said finally, his voice rough. "Maybe less if we panic and use up oxygen faster." Anya looked up from her work, her eyes meeting his. Your blood, those patterns I saw. Is this part of it? The system doing this? The system doesn't care about air, Leo replied, standing slowly. Dust cascaded from his clothes. But the military does. That missile was meant to bury us. They probably think we're dead. He walked to the rubble pile, placing a hand on the cold, rough surface. Through the psychic link, he ordered the Horde to begin digging. The baseline infected moved forward, their clawed hands scraping at the debris. Chunks of concrete shifted, but progress was agonizingly slow, like trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. The mutant alpha, larger and stronger, joined in, its powerful limbs heaving aside heavier fragments. Still, it wasn't enough. Leo could feel the strain in their minds, the frustration of their primitive intellects. They're not strong enough, Jake said, watching as dust trickled from the ceiling with each impact. We're going to die here. Shut up, David snapped, adjusting his broken glasses. He's trying. But Leo knew Jake was right. The rubble was too dense, too massive. He needed more power. The interface offered a solution, Horde fusion. He'd never used it before, but the command glowed in his mind, a complex array of psychic protocols that promised to merge the strength of multiple infected into a single entity. The cost, however, was written in cosmic script, a massive sanity drain. Leo hesitated. His sanity was already frayed, hanging by threads. Each use of the interface peeled back another layer of reality, showing him truths that made his bones ache with dread. The last glimpse, during the domination feedback, had revealed the architect and himself as puppets, their strings pulled by unseen entities that hungered for this world. Could he afford to see more? A soft gasp drew his attention. Eleanor was breathing rapidly, her face pale. Anya rushed to her side, checking her pulse. She's hyperventilating. The air quality is dropping faster than I estimated. Time was running out. Leo made his decision. He focused on the interface, drawing on the psychic link. The command for Horde fusion unfolded in his mind like a blooming nightmare, intricate, beautiful, and terrifying. He selected 5 of the baseline infected, their minds simple and hungry, and the mutant alpha, its consciousness a sharper, more malicious edge. With a mental push, he initiated the fusion. Instantly, pain lanced through his skull. It wasn't physical pain, but something deeper, a tearing at the fabric of his self. His sanity plummeted, 15.3% gone in a single, wrenching moment, dropping to 6.3%. The world around him blurred, the maintenance room fading into a haze of gray static. In its place, he witnessed the fused consciousness. It was a screaming chorus of alien voices, a cacophony that defied human understanding. He felt the baseline infected's primal hunger, not for flesh, but for the assimilation of consciousness, a craving to consume the light of other minds and add it to the cosmic rot. The mutant alpha's malice twisted through it, a desire to dominate, to break and reshape. And beneath it all, the whispers of the entities, cold and vast, observing this tiny experiment on a doomed world. Leo saw truths he couldn't unsee, that every infected was a node in a network, feeding data back to the system, that his own transformation was accelerating, his biology rewriting itself into something that could survive in voids between stars, that the military's fear, the survivor's hope, even his own sanity, all were fuel for the assimilation process. He gasped, stumbling back. The vision faded, but the echoes remained, scratching at the inside of his skull. The maintenance room snapped back into focus, but it felt thinner, less real, as if he were looking at a painting he could tear through with a thought. Leo. Anya's voice sounded distant. Your nose is bleeding. He touched his upper lip, his fingers coming away red. Through the psychic link, he felt the change. The 5 baseline infected were gone, absorbed. In their place stood the mutant alpha, but transformed. It had grown larger, its limbs thickened with corded muscle, its claws elongated into jagged, crystalline shards that gleamed in the flickering light. Its eyes glowed with a sickly purple luminescence, and its mind was a storm of fused consciousness, obedient but seething with alien hunger. Dig, Leo commanded, the word tasting of copper and cosmic dust. The fused mutant moved. It didn't scrape or heave, it tore. Its claws sank into the rubble like it was soft clay, ripping out chunks of concrete and metal with terrifying ease. The sound was a grinding roar that filled the tunnel, dust billowing in thick clouds. Leo ordered the remaining 5 baseline infected to clear the debris, forming a chain to haul it back into the maintenance room. They worked in a grim, silent rhythm, their movements coordinated through his psychic control. Hours passed. Leo's grip on reality wavered with each passing minute. The cosmic truths he'd witnessed lingered at the edges of his perception, threatening to bleed through. He saw patterns in the dust motes, non-Euclidean geometries that hinted at higher dimensions. He heard whispers in the grind of stone, voices murmuring about the futility of resistance. His hands shook, and he had to focus hard to keep the psychic link stable. The survivors watched, their hope warring with horror. Mia covered her mouth as the mutant ripped through a steel beam like it was paper. Jake stared, his baseball bat forgotten. David helped clear smaller debris, his glasses fogged with sweat. Anya monitored Eleanor, who had calmed but was breathing shallowly. The air grew thinner, each breath a labor. Finally, with a last, deafening crash, the mutant broke through. A sliver of gray light pierced the dust, natural light, from the surface. Cool, fresh air washed into the tunnel, carrying the scent of rain and ruin. Leo almost wept with relief. He ordered the mutant to widen the hole, then gestured to the survivors. Go. Now. They didn't need telling twice. David went first, scrambling through the gap. Mia followed, then Jake, helping Eleanor. Anya paused, looking back at Leo. What about you? I'll follow, he said, his voice barely a whisper. His head felt like it was splitting open. Sanity, 6.3%. The number mocked him. Once they were through, Leo sent the 5 baseline infected after them, then the fused mutant. He took one last look at the maintenance room, his first sanctuary, now a grave for 2 shattered infected and his dwindling humanity. Then he crawled through the rubble, his body aching, his mind screaming with alien chorus. He emerged into a ruined city square. The sky overhead was a bruised purple, twilight settling over broken buildings and overturned cars. Rain fell in a fine drizzle, washing the dust from his skin. The survivors stood nearby, staring. And then Leo saw it. Hundreds of infected filled the square, standing motionless in the rain. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, a sea of twisted forms and glowing eyes, baseline infected, mutants with grotesque mutations, and at their center, a figure he recognized from psychic echoes, the scientist mutant, tall and gaunt, wearing tattered lab coat, its head too large, too angular. It stared directly at him, its gaze intelligent and cold. Behind it, the architect's horde waited, perfectly coordinated, silent. A psychic message slammed into Leo's mind, crisp and clear, echoing with cosmic arrogance, join me, Patient Zero. Together, we will ascend as heralds. The fused mutant at Leo's side growled, its claws flexing. The 5 baseline infected shifted nervously. The survivors froze, their hope crumbling into terror. Leo stood in the rain, his sanity hanging by a thread, facing an army born from the same nightmare as his own. The city square stretched before them like a graveyard of civilization, bathed in the sickly orange glow of twilight. Crumbled facades of office buildings loomed like broken teeth against the bruised sky, their windows shattered into jagged mouths. The air tasted of ozone and decay, carrying the distant rumble of military engines and the low, guttural moans of hundreds of infected. Leo stood at the edge of the rubble pile they'd emerged from, his breathing shallow. 6 infected remained under his control, 5 baseline shamblers and the fused mutant alpha, its form now a grotesque amalgamation of multiple bodies with too many limbs and a single, massive claw for digging. Beside him, the survivors huddled, David adjusting his glasses nervously, Mia clutching her kitchen knife, Jake gripping his baseball bat with white knuckles, Eleanor trembling, and Anya watching Leo with clinical concern. Across the square, the architect's horde advanced. They moved with unsettling coordination. Not the mindless shuffle of baseline infected, but something worse, a predatory grace. Hundreds of them, their forms twisted by the cosmic rot into variations of nightmare. Some had elongated limbs that scraped against asphalt. Others bore extra eyes that glowed with faint psychic energy. At their center walked the architect himself, a tall figure whose skin had taken on the texture of polished obsidian, cracked with veins of pulsating violet light. Beside him strode the scientist mutant, its head swollen with exposed brain matter that shimmered with data streams. Leo's remaining sanity, a fragile 6.3%, screamed at the sight. The interface whispered percentages and probabilities, calculating their survival odds at 2.7% in direct confrontation. His head throbbed with the aftermath of horde fusion, the alien chorus of merged consciousness still echoing in his skull like tinnitus from another dimension. "They're surrounding us," David whispered, his voice cracking. Mia pointed with her knife. "Look at the buildings, snipers on the rooftops." Leo followed her gaze. Military positions had been established during their hours underground. Hazmat-suited soldiers moved behind sandbag emplacements, their rifles tracking the infected hordes. 2 armored vehicles idled at the square's northern entrance, their turrets slowly panning. The blockade from the subway had redeployed, reinforced with fresh units. They were caught between 2 forces, both intent on their destruction. A psychic message sliced through the air, bypassing ears to implant directly in consciousness. It carried the architect's voice, smooth, cultured, and utterly mad. Patient Zero. You stand at the crossroads of evolution. Join me as herald, and together we will sculpt this world into a monument to the entities. The words came with images, cities reshaped into organic architecture, humanity transformed into a unified psychic network, the planets singing in harmony with cosmic frequencies. Leo felt the allure in them, the promise of purpose, of an end to the constant hunger and fear. His remaining sanity recognized it as poison. He's trying to subvert you, Anya said, her medical training making her perceptive to psychological manipulation. Don't listen. Leo closed his eyes, focusing on the interface. He activated Psychic Shield, the minimal version that cost only 0.5% sanity. The barrier shimmered around his mind, deflecting the architect's influence. His sanity dropped to 5.8%. The architect's horde halted 50 yards away, forming a semicircle. The scientist mutant raised a hand, and psychic tendrils extended from its exposed brain, connecting to nearby infected. They began to shift formation, some climbing building facades with spider-like agility. We can't fight them, Jake said, his teenage bravado crumbling. There's too many. Eleanor clutched at Leo's arm. Please. Do something. Leo's thoughts raced. Direct combat was suicide, the interface confirmed it. But the military presented an equal threat. They'd launch missiles again, or worse, deploy whatever experimental weapons they developed. He needed time, space, a chance to regroup. The architect wanted to absorb him, not necessarily kill him immediately. That offered a window. He opened a psychic channel, careful to keep his mental defenses partially raised. The connection felt like dipping his mind into icy oil. Architect. The military will destroy us both if we fight here. The response came instantly, tinged with amusement. Their weapons are primitive. My horde has absorbed their tactics through consumed soldiers. We will overrun them. Look at their positioning, Leo projected, sharing the sensory data from his own scouting earlier. He highlighted the armored vehicles, the sniper nests, the fresh reinforcements arriving on the eastern flank. They've adapted. They're using incendiary rounds now, see the markings on their ammunition belts. Your infected burn just like mine. A pause. Leo felt the architect's consciousness analyzing the data. The rival mutant was intelligent, strategic, but arrogant. He believed his enhanced horde superior to human technology. What do you propose? The architect finally sent. Leo took a breath that tasted of dust and desperation. A temporary alliance. Combined hordes to break through the military cordon. Once we're clear of the city center, we go our separate ways. Laughter echoed psychically, sharp and mocking. You think I would trust you? You who cling to humanity like a child to a blanket. You don't have to trust me, Leo sent back. Use Psychic Pact. The interface has protocols for temporary cooperation between infected commanders. Shared control, mutual objectives, automatic dissolution after conditions are met. He felt the architect's interest sharpen. The Psychic Pact was an advanced interface function Leo had only glimpsed in system menus, a formal agreement that would link their hordes temporarily, allowing coordinated control without full assimilation. It required both parties to lower mental defenses, creating a vulnerable connection. The cost, the architect demanded. Sanity, Leo admitted. For both of us. The pact forces consciousness alignment. We'll see each other's truths. And what truths do you hide, Patient Zero? That I'm still more human than you want to believe. Another pause, longer this time. The military vehicles began advancing, their engines growling. Soldiers took firing positions. Time was running out. Propose the terms, the architect sent. Leo focused, accessing the pact interface. System prompts flashed behind his eyes. Psychic Pact initiated. Parties, Leo, Patient Zero, /Architect, Enhanced Mutant Commander. Objective, break military cordon at City Square. Duration, until objective complete or 2 hours elapsed. Control sharing, 50/50th split on combined Horde. Sanity cost, 8% minimum per party. He transmitted the framework. The architect examined it, his psychic presence probing for loopholes. Leo kept his mind as transparent as possible, hiding only his deepest fear, that he might actually want the architect's vision of unity, that the hunger for cosmic truth was growing in him too. Accepted, the architect sent. Lower your shields. Leo hesitated. His sanity stood at 5.8%. Dropping his psychic shield for the pact would cost at least 8%, possibly more depending on how deeply the architect's madness infected him. He'd be left with negative sanity, whatever that meant. The interface had never specified what happened below zero. Leo, don't, Anya said, reading his expression. Whatever you're considering. It's our only chance, he interrupted, his voice hoarse. He looked at the survivors. David's glasses were fogged with panic sweat. Mia had positioned herself between Eleanor and the advancing horde. Jake was muttering what might have been a prayer. Anya's medical scrubs were stained with dirt and blood, but her eyes held steady concern. They were his responsibility. He'd brought them here, into this nightmare. He owed them survival. Leo took a final breath of relatively clean air, then dropped his psychic shield completely. The architect's mind flooded in. It was like being submerged in an ocean of screaming stars. Visions cascaded through Leo's consciousness, galaxies being unraveled into psychic threads, civilizations harvested for their collective consciousness, the entities themselves, vast, shapeless things that existed between dimensions, hungering for the unique flavor of Earth's reality. The architect's ambitions unfolded, not just planetary assimilation, but using Earth as a bridgehead to infect neighboring realities, creating an infinite network of assimilated worlds. The sanity cost hit immediately. Leo felt it draining away, 3%, 5%, 7%. The interface flashed warnings. Sanity, -1.2%. Cosmic truth exposure, critical. Entity awareness, increasing. He was below zero. The world fractured around him. The city square became a layered reality. He saw the physical buildings, but superimposed over them were psychic architectures the architect had designed, ghostly blueprints of organic spires that would replace skyscrapers. The soldiers weren't just humans in hazmat suits, they were packets of fear energy that the interface marked as consumable resources. The infected hordes glowed with network connections, a web of violet light linking them to the architect, and now to Leo. The pact completed. A psychic bond snapped into place between them, taut as a wire. Leo could feel the architect's horde, all 327 infected units, as extensions of his own will. Simultaneously, the architect gained control over Leo's 6 remaining units. Interesting, the architect's voice came, now intimate inside Leo's skull. You still care for the meat. How quaint. Leo fought to maintain coherence. The cosmic truths threatened to dissolve his sense of self. He focused on the military threat, using the objective as an anchor. Flanking maneuver, he projected, sharing tactical data. Your climbers take the rooftops, eliminate snipers. My fused alpha and your heavies hit the armored vehicles head-on. Baseline infected swarm the infantry positions. Agreed, the architect sent, and Leo felt the rival mutants' approval at the strategy. But add this, psychic interference on their communications. My scientist has developed frequency disruption. A new command flowed through the pact bond. Leo saw the scientist mutant extend its psychic tendrils further, emitting a pulse that scrambled radio signals. Soldiers suddenly clutched their headsets, their coordinated movements faltering. The combined horde moved. It was terrifyingly beautiful in its efficiency. The architect's climbers scaled buildings with impossible speed, dropping onto sniper nests before the soldiers could react. Leo's fused alpha charged the lead armored vehicle, its massive claw tearing through armor plating like paper. Baseline infected from both hordes merged into a tidal wave of flesh that crashed against sandbag emplacements. Leo stood at the center of it all, his consciousness split between hundreds of perspectives. He saw through the eyes of a climber as it ripped a soldier's helmet off. He felt the impact vibrations through the alpha's claw as it punched through engine blocks. He experienced the hunger of baseline infected as they overwhelmed firing positions. The military fought back. Incendiary rounds turned infected into torches. Grenades tore gaps in the horde. One of the architect's enhanced mutants, a creature with crystalline growths, took a direct hit from a vehicle-mounted cannon and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. But the numbers told. The combined horde had over 330 units against 60 soldiers. The psychic disruption prevented reinforcements from being called. The soldiers' discipline broke as they realized they were being surrounded. Now, the architect projected. Concentrate on the command vehicle. Leo directed the Alpha and a dozen heavies toward the lead armored transport. They hit it from 3 sides, prying doors open. Inside, an officer was shouting into a dead radio. The Alpha reached in and Leo severed the sensory feed. He couldn't watch. His sanity, already negative, trembled at the edge of complete dissolution. The battle lasted 18 minutes according to the interface's timer. When it ended, the military cordon was broken. Vehicles burned. Soldiers who hadn't been consumed had retreated, carrying wounded comrades. The square belonged to the infected. Leo gasped, returning fully to his own body. The survivors stared at him, their faces pale. They'd watched the entire coordinated attack, seeing infected from both hordes working together with military precision. "It's over," David whispered. "We can go." But the psychic pact still held. Leo could feel the architect's consciousness coiled beside his own, waiting. Objective complete, Leo sent through the bond. Dissolve the pact. The architect's laughter echoed again, colder now. "Why would I do that? Your control is exquisite, patient zero. So precise. So human in its limitations." A warning shiver traveled down the pact bond. Leo tried to pull back, to reassert his mental boundaries, but the connection held fast. "Our agreement was a means to an end," the architect interrupted. "You have shown me something valuable, that clinging to humanity creates tactical flexibility. I will incorporate that into my network. Starting with your horde." Psychic pressure slammed into Leo's mind. The architect was trying to seize full control of Leo's 6 infected units, and through the lingering pact connection, attempting to override Leo's own command authority. Leo resisted, throwing up what mental barriers he could muster. But with negative sanity, his defenses were porous. He felt the architect's will seeping in, trying to rewrite his psychic commands, to make the fused Alpha turn on the survivors, to make the baseline infected surround him. "No!" Leo shouted aloud, clutching his head. Anya grabbed his arm. "What's happening?" "He's betraying," Leo choked out before psychic feedback stole his voice. The architect's presence intensified. "Submit. Become a node in my network. Together we will." Leo did the only thing he could think of. He activated domination feedback, channeling the architect's own assault back through the pact bond. But with their minds already linked, the feedback became a loop. Pain exploded behind Leo's eyes, white-hot agony that felt like his brain was being unfolded into higher dimensions. The interface flashed, not in warning, but in announcement. Assimilation progress, 25%. Entity proximity imminent. And through the pain, Leo saw them, the entities. Not fully, just glimpses at the edge of perception. Vast shapes moving in the spaces between seconds, drawn by the psychic conflict, by the increasing assimilation of Earth's reality. They were coming closer. The architect recoiled, breaking the feedback loop. The psychic pact dissolved in a burst of psychic static. Leo collapsed to his knees, vomiting nothing but bile and cosmic dread. When his vision cleared, the architect and his horde were retreating, melting back into the ruined city. But the scientist mutant paused, looking back at Leo with its exposed brain shimmering. It transmitted one final message. "They taste your fear. They're coming." Then they were gone, leaving Leo and the survivors alone in the square with burning vehicles, dead soldiers, and the interface's countdown now ticking louder than ever. The city square lay in ruins around them, a testament to the battle that had just ended. Smoke curled from shattered military vehicles, their armored hulls torn open by infected claws. Blood stained the cracked pavement in dark, spreading pools. Leo stood at the center of the devastation, his 6 remaining infected units forming a loose perimeter around the survivors who huddled together, their faces pale with exhaustion and terror. David adjusted his glasses, his hands trembling as he clutched the fire extinguisher he'd carried since the subway. Mia kept her kitchen knife ready, her backpack weighing heavy on her shoulders. Jake leaned on his baseball bat, breathing heavily, while Eleanor wrapped an arm around the teenage boy's shoulders. Anya, still in her medical scrubs now stained with dirt and blood, watched Leo with a doctor's analytical eye, though fear shone through her professional detachment. Leo's mind felt like shattered glass. The psychic backlash from the architect's betrayal had left his thoughts fragmented, drifting in and out of coherence. His sanity readout in the corner of his vision flickered, -2.2%. The negative value made no logical sense, yet he understood it perfectly. He had dipped below zero, into territory where human consciousness shouldn't be able to function. He was running on borrowed time, on memories and instincts that were rapidly dissolving. He could feel the fused mutant alpha nearby, its consciousness a discordant symphony of 5 baseline infected minds merged with the original mutant's predatory intelligence. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body a patchwork of mismatched limbs and bulging muscle, with too many eyes that glowed with faint psychic energy. It dug claws into the pavement, leaving deep grooves as it shifted restlessly. The 5 baseline infected moved with mechanical precision, their movements synchronized through the psychic link Leo maintained at minimal cost, a trickle of mental energy he could barely afford. "We need to move," Leo thought, the words forming sluggishly in his mind. "The military will regroup. The architect might return." But his body wouldn't respond. His limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The interface's usual text-based messages had vanished, replaced by a profound silence that was somehow more terrifying than any warning. It was the silence before a storm, the empty space between thoughts where something else could slip in. Then it came. Not as text. Not as a visual prompt. It arrived as a voice that bypassed his ears entirely, speaking directly into the core of his consciousness. The voice had no gender, no age, no recognizable quality of humanity. It resonated at frequencies that made his bones vibrate, that made the air around him seem to thicken with unseen pressure. Patient Zero. The words weren't English, weren't any language, yet he understood them perfectly. They carried weight, meaning, and something else, a kind of alien approval that felt like ice water poured down his spine. "Your efficiency exceeds projections." Leo's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the survivors staring at him, could see their confusion as they watched him stagger, one hand rising to clutch at his temple. The voice continued, each syllable vibrating through his neural pathways like a physical force. "The assimilation network expands through your actions. The architect's resistance was foreseen. Your countermeasures demonstrate adaptability." There was a pause, and in that pause, Leo felt something he'd never experienced before, not fear, not anger, but a profound, soul-deep wrongness. The voice wasn't just speaking to him. It was tasting him. Sampling his consciousness like a curious scientist examining a specimen. "Full assimilation offers rewards beyond your current comprehension," the voice continued. "Your sanity is a small price for elevation. Embrace the network. Become the conduit for our arrival." Images flooded Leo's mind, not as memories but as possibilities. He saw himself not as a man commanding infected, but as something greater, a living nexus of psychic energy, his body transformed into a beacon that could call down the entities from whatever dark space between stars they currently inhabited. He saw worlds consumed, not through violence, but through perfect, seamless integration. Every living thing becoming part of a single consciousness, a single purpose. And he would be at the center of it all, not as a victim, but as a herald. A god. For one terrible, tempting moment, he considered it. The exhaustion would end. The constant battle for survival, the guilt over what he'd become, the fear of losing himself, all of it would vanish. He would have purpose. Power. Control over everything. Then he looked at the survivors. David's glasses were smudged with grime, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent. He'd been an accountant before all this, Leo remembered suddenly. He'd mentioned it in the subway, talking about spreadsheets and quarterly reports as if they were relics from a lost civilization. Mia clutched her kitchen knife like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. She'd been a graphic designer, creating beautiful things for people who would never appreciate them. Jake, just a teenager, should have been worrying about exams and dating, not fighting for his life in a ruined city. Eleanor had grandchildren somewhere, if they were still alive. Anya had sworn an oath to heal people, not watch them turn into monsters. These were the faces the voice wanted to erase. These memories, these lives, these fragile, beautiful, messy human things, they were the small price the entity mentioned. "No," Leo whispered aloud, the word tearing from his throat. The survivors jumped at the sound. Anya took a step forward. "Leo? What's happening?" He couldn't answer her. The voice was still there, still whispering, still offering. And part of him still wanted to accept. The part that remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the terrifying glimpses of cosmic truth that came with every use of his powers. That part whispered back, it would be so easy. His sanity readout flickered, minus 4.1%. Dropping fast. He was losing himself. The entity's whisper wasn't just communication, it was erosion. Every word wore away at what remained of Leo, smoothing his edges, preparing him to be reshaped into something that could serve as a proper vessel. He had to fight back. But how? Psychic shield wouldn't work, this wasn't an attack, not in the conventional sense. Domination feedback required a target to reflect against. Horde fusion had already cost him too much. His available skills scrolled through his mind: psychic domination, psychic suggestion, psychic shield, domination feedback, horde fusion. Wait. There was something else. Not a skill he'd used before, but a command buried deep in the interface's architecture, something he'd glimpsed during the worst of the sanity drains. A last resort for when the cosmic truths became too much to bear. It wasn't listed in his active abilities, but he could feel it there, like a hidden switch in a dark room. Sanity Anchor. The name came to him not as a revelation, but as a memory of something he'd always known but never needed until now. A command that would tether his consciousness to something concrete, something human, something real. It would cost him almost everything that remained of his sanity, burning through it like fuel to keep a single flame alive. But it might silence the whisper. For a while. Leo. David's voice cut through the haze. Your nose is bleeding. Leo touched his upper lip, his fingers coming away wet and red. He hadn't even noticed. The psychic pressure was building, the entity's presence growing more insistent. He could feel it probing at the edges of his mind, looking for weaknesses, for purchase. He had to decide. Now. Closing his eyes, Leo reached inward, not toward the interface's power, but toward its architecture. He bypassed the usual command pathways, diving deeper than he ever had before, into the foundational code of whatever alien technology had rewritten his biology. It was like swimming through ice-cold oil, every movement sluggish, every thought heavy with resistance. He found it, a single, glowing node buried in the psychic infrastructure. The Sanity Anchor Protocol. Activating it required a focus point, something to tether himself to. The interface suggested options: power sources, geographical locations, psychic signatures. Leo ignored them all. Instead, he reached for the faces. David's determined eyes behind smudged glasses. Mia's white-knuckled grip on her kitchen knife. Jake's youthful fear mixed with stubborn courage. Eleanor's maternal concern. Anya's clinical observation hiding profound compassion. He gathered these images, these memories, these living, breathing fragments of humanity, and he wrapped the sanity anchor around them. The cost was immediate and devastating. His sanity readout plummeted, minus 8.7%, minus 12.3%, minus 15.9%. Numbers flashed by too fast to read, the descent accelerating as the anchor consumed everything that remained of his coherent consciousness. He felt memories dissolving, not just recent ones, but childhood recollections, the sound of his mother's voice, the taste of his favorite food, the feeling of sunlight on his skin on a perfect summer day. They evaporated like morning mist, burned away to fuel the anchor. The entity's whisper grew louder, more insistent, then suddenly cut off as if a door had been slammed shut. The psychic pressure vanished, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Leo opened his eyes. The world had changed. Colors were muted, edges blurred. Sounds reached him as if through water. He could still see the survivors, still recognize them, but their faces seemed distant, viewed through a thick pane of glass. He knew their names, their roles, but the emotional connections, the reasons why he cared about them, were gone, replaced by cold, clinical data. Patient, David. Class, survivor. Threat level, minimal. Usefulness, moderate. Patient, Mia. Class, survivor. Threat level, minimal. Usefulness, moderate. And so on. But the whisper was silent. The entity's presence had been pushed back, at least temporarily. His sanity readout had stabilized at 0.3%. A sliver. A razor's edge of coherent thought balanced above an abyss of cosmic madness. We need to leave the city, Leo said, his voice flat, emotionless. Urban centers accelerate assimilation. The interface's progress correlates with population density. The survivors exchanged worried glances. Anya stepped closer, her medical training overriding her fear. Leo, you're in shock. Your pupils are dilated, and you're showing signs of severe psychological trauma. Not trauma, Leo corrected mechanically. Strategic reassessment. The architect demonstrated that rival infected will continue to be a threat. Military forces will regroup with greater numbers and heavier weaponry. Remaining in an urban environment increases exposure to both. He turned away from them, focusing inward on the psychic link with his horde. The fused mutant alpha responded immediately, its multi-limbed body shifting as it received new commands. The 5 baseline infected spread out, moving to scout the perimeter of the ruined square. Through their eyes, Leo saw the aftermath of the battle in disjointed fragments. Military bodies lay where they'd fallen, some still twitching. Abandoned equipment smoked in the twilight. In the distance, sirens wailed, reinforcements approaching, or maybe just emergency services responding to a catastrophe they couldn't possibly understand. The baseline infected reached the edge of the square and continued outward, moving through ruined streets and collapsed buildings. Their senses were limited, sight, sound, smell, all filtered through the simplistic consciousness of the infected. But they were numerous enough to cover ground quickly, and the psychic link allowed Leo to process their observations simultaneously, building a composite picture of the surrounding area. Most of what they found was predictable: more ruins, more bodies, scattered groups of survivors hiding in buildings, a few lone infected wandering aimlessly. But one of the baseline infected, moving northwest along what had once been a major highway, encountered something different. The highway led out of the city, climbing into foothills that marked the beginning of mountain ranges. The infected's vision showed crumbling asphalt, abandoned vehicles, and then, a facility. Built into the side of a mountain, partially concealed by natural rock formations and artificial camouflage netting that had mostly fallen away. The main structure was a bunker-like entrance, heavy blast doors sealed shut. Smaller outbuildings dotted the surrounding area, some collapsed, others still standing. Automated defenses tracked the infected as it approached. A turret mounted above the main entrance swiveled smoothly, its barrels aligning with the creature. A targeting laser painted a red dot on the infected's chest. The creature paused, confused by the unfamiliar threat. Leo pushed more awareness through the link, examining the facility through the infected's eyes. The architecture was military, but older, Cold War era, maybe. The automated defenses were more recent additions, their sleek lines contrasting with the brutalist concrete of the main structure. Warning signs were visible on the blast doors, faded but still legible: restricted access. Biosecurity level 4. And there were other signs. Not recent, but not ancient either. Scratches on the blast doors that looked like claw marks. Dark stains on the concrete that could have been blood, long dried to a rusty brown. A broken containment suit lay near one of the outbuildings, its faceplate shattered from the inside. The infected took another step forward. The turret fired, a single shot that punched through the infected's chest with surgical precision. The creature collapsed, the psychic link snapping abruptly as its consciousness winked out. But in the moment before death, it had seen one more thing. Through the cracked viewport of a secondary entrance, partially obscured by debris, there was movement. Not human movement. Something with too many limbs, shifting in the shadows. And on the wall behind it, barely visible, a symbol spray-painted in what looked like fresh blood, the same twisting, non-Euclidean shape that sometimes flashed at the edges of Leo's vision when he used his powers. The mountain facility wasn't just abandoned. It had been a research site. And something had gone terribly wrong there. Leo's remaining sanity, that precious 0.3%, processed the information with cold efficiency. The facility was remote, defensible, and large enough to house survivors. Its automated defenses could be disabled or repurposed. Its isolation would slow the assimilation progress, buying time. But it was also contaminated. Previous infection experiments meant potential mutations, unknown threats. The symbol suggested a connection to the entities, or at least to someone who had encountered them before. He turned back to the survivors. They were watching him, waiting for direction. David had his fire extinguisher ready. Mia's knuckles were white on her kitchen knife. Jake leaned on his baseball bat. Eleanor held Anya's hand, the doctor allowing the contact despite her usual professional distance. "We have a destination," Leo said, his voice still flat, still empty of everything except purpose. Northwest. Mountain facility. Former research bunker. Automated defenses present. Evidence of previous infection events. He didn't tell them about the symbol. Didn't tell them about the thing moving in the shadows. Those were tactical concerns, not relevant to their immediate survival. How far? Anya asked, her medical mind already calculating supplies, endurance, potential injuries. Approximately 47 miles, Leo replied. Terrain includes highway remnants, foothills, and mountain passes. Estimated travel time with current group composition, 2 to 3 days, assuming minimal hostile encounters. Assuming, David repeated, pushing his glasses up his nose. That's a big assumption. Correct, Leo said. But remaining here guarantees hostile encounters within hours. Military reinforcements are approaching from the southeast. The Architect's forces are regrouping to the northeast. Probability of survival if we stay, less than 5%. Probability of survival if we move toward the facility, approximately 32%. He didn't mention that the facility itself might kill them. That the symbol on the wall suggested horrors they hadn't even imagined yet. Those were variables he couldn't quantify, so they weren't included in the calculation. The survivors looked at each other, then back at Leo. They saw the blood drying under his nose. They saw the emptiness in his eyes, the mechanical precision of his movements. They saw a man who had once been one of them, now reduced to something that quoted percentages and probabilities while standing amid the corpses of the infected he controlled. But they also saw their only chance. Okay, Mia said softly, tightening the straps on her backpack. Okay. Northwest it is. Leo nodded, a stiff, jerky motion. He turned to his remaining horde, the fused mutant alpha and 4 baseline infected. Through the psychic link, he issued new commands: scout ahead, clear paths, eliminate threats. The creatures moved with silent efficiency, spreading out to form a protective cordon around the group. As they began to move, leaving the ruined city square behind, Leo allowed himself one final look back. The twilight had deepened into proper night, and the first stars were visible overhead. They looked different now, not distant points of light, but eyes watching from an unimaginable distance. Waiting. The entity's whisper might have been silenced, but the pressure was still there. The sense of being observed, studied, measured for suitability. The sanity anchor held, but it was a fragile thing, built on memories that were already fading. He could feel them slipping away even now, David's name becoming just Survivor 1, Mia's face becoming a collection of biometric data points rather than a person he'd risked his life to protect. But he had a destination. A purpose. A plan. For now, that would have to be enough. The city's edge faded behind them like a bad dream, swallowed by the creeping wilderness that had once been suburbs and parks. Leo walked at the head of the ragged column, his 5 remaining infected units flanking the survivors in a loose protective formation. David, Mia, Jake, Eleanor, and Anya followed in weary silence, their footsteps crunching on overgrown asphalt and broken concrete. The air tasted of decay and pine, a sickly sweet mixture that clung to the back of Leo's throat. His mind felt like cracked glass. The 0.3% sanity reading in his interface hovered at the edge of his awareness, a constant whisper of impending shatter. Every thought required effort, as if pushing through thickening syrup. The survivors' faces, David's glasses catching the weak morning light, Mia's backpack straps digging into her shoulders, Jake's white-knuckled grip on his baseball bat, Eleanor's trembling hands, Anya's medical scrub stained with dirt and old blood, these were his anchors. He focused on them, using the sanity anchor command to tether himself to their humanity. The memory of their expressions when he'd explained the mountain facility played on loop in his mind, hope warring with terror. 2 to 3 days, he'd told them. The estimate felt optimistic now. The first day passed in a haze of exhaustion. They moved through abandoned neighborhoods where houses stood with broken windows like empty eye sockets. Infected wildlife, squirrels with too many joints, birds whose feathers had molted into fleshy membranes, watched from trees. Leo kept his horde close, using psychic suggestion to guide them around potential threats. Each command cost him. Not in the dramatic sanity drops of before, but in tiny, persistent leaks. A 0.1% decrease here as he directed the fused mutant alpha to clear fallen power lines. Another 0.2% as he used psychic shield to deflect the psychic scent markings left by rival mutants in the area. By nightfall, they'd reached the edge of the forest proper. The trees here were wrong. Their bark peeled in patterns that looked like screaming faces when the moonlight hit them at certain angles. Leo set up camp in the shell of a ranger station, its walls scarred by claw marks. The survivors huddled inside while his infected patrolled the perimeter. He sat by the doorway, watching the forest breathe. It was breathing. Not metaphorically. The ground pulsed in slow, rhythmic swells. Tree roots twisted like intestines. When he blinked, he saw the truth. This wasn't a forest at all, but a massive organism of cosmic rot, its mycelial network spreading through the soil, converting earth and stone into something alive and hungry. The interface fed him the data without prompting. Biomass conversion rate, 14%. Assimilation of local ecosystem, ongoing. He closed his eyes, gripping the doorframe until his knuckles turned white. The sanity anchor held, but barely. On the second day, the military patrols found them. It happened mid-morning as they crossed a logging road. Distant rotor sounds, helicopters, maybe drones. Leo froze, raising a hand. The survivors ducked into the underbrush. His infected dropped to the ground, their forms blending with the mud and leaves through sheer stillness. But it wouldn't be enough. Aerial surveillance would pick up heat signatures, movement patterns. The interface offered a solution. Horde camouflage, psychic masking of biological signatures. Sustained ability. Sanity cost, variable. Leo didn't hesitate. He activated it, feeling the command ripple through his connection to the Horde. A psychic veil settled over them, bending light and heat around their forms. To any sensor, they'd appear as background noise, shifting shadows, thermal fluctuations no different from the forest's own corrupted life. The cost came in waves. Every hour of sustained camouflage drained another fraction of his sanity. 0.4% gone by noon. 0.7% by the time the sun began to set. With each drop, the forest's true nature became more vivid. The trees weren't just breathing, they were whispering. Their leaves formed words in languages that hurt to hear. The ground beneath his feet felt like living flesh, warm and pulsing with alien blood. He saw the network, the same assimilation network he'd glimpsed during Horde fusion, threading through everything. It connected the infected wildlife, the mutated plants, even the air itself. This whole region was becoming one organism, and they were walking through its circulatory system. He kept moving. One foot in front of the other. David offered him a canteen at one point. Leo took it without tasting the water. Anya checked his pulse, her fingers cold against his wrist. "Your heart's racing," she murmured. He didn't tell her it was because he could feel the mountain's heartbeat ahead of them, a slow, tectonic thrum that matched the interface's countdown. They found the rivals' trail on the morning of the third day. It was impossible to miss. A swath of destruction cut through the forest, trees ripped from the ground, earth churned into mud, the corpses of infected animals torn apart and left to rot. The scent of psychic aggression hung in the air like ozone after lightning. The architect's Horde had passed through here, and recently. They were being tracked. Leo pushed them harder. The mountain loomed ahead, its peaks shrouded in mist that glowed with faint bioluminescence. The facility was on its eastern face, according to the scouting report. They reached the base by midday, climbing through rocky foothills where the trees gave way to scree and stubborn lichen. The air grew thinner, colder. The survivors struggled, but no one complained. The alternative, staying in the forest with the rivals' Horde closing in, was unthinkable. The final approach was a narrow path carved into the mountainside. Leo sent his fused mutant alpha ahead as a scout. Through its eyes, he saw the facility, a bunker built into the rock face, its entrance a reinforced steel door set behind a concrete apron. Automated turrets mounted on either side tracked movement, their barrels gleaming in the gray light. The symbol from the scouting report was etched above the door, a circle intersected by 3 jagged lines, like a broken eye. They reached the entrance as evening shadows stretched across the valley below. Leo called his Horde back, forming a defensive semicircle. The survivors gathered behind him, breathing hard. The door was sealed. No handle, no keypad, just a smooth panel with a biometric scanner glowing faintly blue. Leo stepped forward, examining it. The interface offered no commands for bypassing advanced locks. He placed a hand against the cold steel, reaching out with psychic domination, trying to feel for mechanisms, for any weakness. Nothing. The door was psychically shielded, its construction alien even to the assimilation network. Then he saw movement through the narrow window set into the door's upper section. He leaned closer, wiping grime from the reinforced glass. Inside, in a well-lit corridor, human figures moved with purpose. They wore clean clothing, not scavenged rags, but uniforms of some kind. One carried a clipboard. Another operated a wall-mounted console. They moved with coordination, efficiency. No signs of infection. No madness in their eyes. They were organized. They were uninfected. And they were looking right back at him. The bunker door hissed open on hydraulic pistons, revealing a sliver of sterile white light that cut through the mountain twilight. Leo stood at the threshold, his horde arrayed behind him in a loose defensive crescent, for baseline infected with their twitching, jerky movements, and the fused mutant alpha looming like a grotesque statue. The survivors huddled close, their faces gaunt from the 3-day trek, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. A woman in a lab coat stepped into the doorway, her face pale under the harsh lighting. She held a tablet in one hand, the other resting on a holstered sidearm. Her eyes scanned Leo first, then the infected behind him, lingering on the alpha's fused limbs and exposed bone. "I'm Dr. Keller," she said, her voice steady but edged with exhaustion. "We've been monitoring your approach." The camouflage field was impressive. Leo felt the interface pulse in his mind, a dull throb that echoed the rhythm of his remaining sanity. At -0.8%, every thought felt like wading through tar, the world around him occasionally shimmering with false geometries, the mountain rocks sometimes appearing as stacked vertebrae, the trees as frozen tendrils of some greater organism. He forced himself to focus. "We need shelter. The architect's horde is closing in." Dr. Keller's gaze flickered to the survivors. David adjusted his glasses, his knuckles white around the fire extinguisher he'd carried since the subway. Mia kept her kitchen knife ready, backpack slung over one shoulder. Jake's baseball bat rested on his shoulder, the teenage boy trying to look taller than he was. Eleanor clutched a worn shawl around her shoulders, while Anya, still in medical scrubs, watched with a doctor's analytical eyes. "Come in," Dr. Keller said after a long moment. "But your companions stay outside. We have containment protocols." Leo shook his head. "They're under my control. They won't harm you." "It's not about harm," another voice said from inside. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair stepped into view, wearing a stained lab coat over military fatigues. "It's about contamination. The cosmic rot isn't just a pathogen, it's a rewriting of biological code. Your presence alone accelerates the assimilation field." Leo felt a cold spike in his gut. The interface whispered at the edge of his consciousness, a sibilant promise of data if he just reached for it. He resisted, clinging to the sliver of sanity left. "What do you know about it?" Dr. Keller gestured them inside. The bunker's interior was a stark contrast to the ruined world outside, clean white corridors lined with blinking monitors, sealed doors marked with biohazard symbols. As they entered, Leo's infected remained outside, standing motionless in the gathering dark. The Alpha's multiple eyes tracked the scientists with unsettling precision. They were led to a central laboratory, where 3 other scientists worked at terminals. One, a younger man with nervous hands, kept glancing at Leo as if expecting him to transform at any moment. Another, an older woman with sharp features, studied a holographic display showing swirling patterns of energy that Leo recognized, the same patterns he saw during sanity drains. "We were part of a private research initiative," the man in fatigue said, introducing himself as Dr. Vance. "Studying anomalous energy signatures before the outbreak. When the cosmic rot hit, we sealed ourselves in. We've been analyzing it ever since." He tapped a console, and a transparent cylinder rose from a table, containing a viscous, iridescent fluid that shifted colors like oil on water. "This is what we call the sanitizer. A temporary suppressor derived from harvested interface fragments. It can stall infection progression for hours, maybe days. But it's unstable, breaks down under psychic stress." Anya stepped forward, her doctor's curiosity overriding caution. "How does it work?" "It creates a psychic buffer," Dr. Keller explained. "Mimics the interface's control signals but without the assimilation directive. Like giving the infected a placebo command to remain dormant. But it requires constant recalibration. And it doesn't work on patient zero-level carriers." She looked directly at Leo. Leo felt the weight of their stares. The interface pulsed again, offering a torrent of information about the sanitizer's molecular structure, its flaws, how to improve it by sacrificing just a little more sanity. He pushed it down. "You have defenses. Automated turrets at the perimeter," Dr. Vance said. "But they're designed for small incursions, not a coordinated horde. The architect's forces number in the hundreds. We saw them on satellite feeds before the networks went dark." Leo walked to a tactical display showing the mountain terrain. His mind, trained by countless hours of interface-driven strategy, immediately began calculating approaches, choke points, ambush sites. But the calculations came with a cost. Each tactical assessment bled into cosmic patterns, the mountain passes becoming neural pathways in some vast alien mind, the approaching Horde an immune response to his presence. He gritted his teeth, feeling his sanity tick down to minus 1.2%. I can set traps, Leo said, his voice strained. Use my Horde to funnel them into kill zones. But I need your turret control codes. Dr. Keller and Dr. Vance exchanged a look. Why would you help us? Vance asked. Because the architect won't stop with you, Leo said. He wants this facility. The research. The sanitizer. And if he gets it, he'll use it to control the infection instead of fighting it. He'll become a king in a dead world. He didn't mention the interface's warning about the entities, the approaching presence that made the architect's ambition seem petty. The scientists didn't need that horror yet. After tense negotiation, they agreed. Leo would coordinate the defense using psychic coordination, linking his Horde's movements with the bunker's automated systems. In return, the survivors would receive sanctuary, and the scientists would study Leo's interface, with his supervision. As night fell, Leo stood at the bunker's observation window, looking out at the darkening mountains. His infected were positioned at key points along the eastern pass, where the architect's Horde would likely approach. The Alpha waited at the narrowest choke point, its fused body blocking the path like a living barricade. Leo closed his eyes and activated psychic coordination. The world dissolved into a tactical overlay. He saw through the eyes of his baseline infected, the rough stone of the pass, the scent of damp earth and ozone. He felt the Alpha's heightened senses, the vibration of distant movement through the ground. He linked these perceptions to the bunker's systems, marking turret fields of fire, designing kill zones where overlapping fire could shred advancing infected. But with each command, the interface bled madness into his planning. Setting an ambush at a rockfall site became an exercise in cosmic geometry. The falling rocks weren't just obstacles but fragments of shattered reality, the infected weren't enemies but cells in a greater organism rejecting a foreign presence. He planned flanking maneuvers that would have made a general proud, but in his mind, they were rituals to appease hungry stars. His sanity dropped to minus 2.1%. Dr. Keller watched from a monitor station, her face grim. Your neural patterns are deteriorating. The interface is rewriting your thought processes at a fundamental level. Assimilation isn't just physical, it's cognitive. Once it reaches a certain threshold, there's no coming back. Leo opened his eyes, the real world snapping back into focus with a nauseating lurch. How long? Days. Maybe hours if you keep using advanced commands. The sanitizer might buy you time, but it's untested on your level of integration. He nodded, too tired to feel despair. The survivors were being settled into makeshift quarters down the hall. David was helping Eleanor with a cot, Mia and Jake arguing in whispers about watch schedules. Anya was already at a lab terminal, cross-referencing medical data with the scientists' findings. For a moment, Leo allowed himself to remember why he was doing this, their faces, their fragile humanity. The sanity anchor he'd used days ago still held, a thin tether to who he'd been. But the tether was fraying. Dawn approached, the sky lightening to bruised purple. Leo returned to the observation window. Through the Alpha's eyes, he saw movement in the distant pass, shadows shifting, the glint of mutated flesh under the first rays of sun. The architect's Horde was here. Then he saw the architect himself. The mutant scientist stood at the forefront of his Horde, but he was transformed. Where before he'd been a twisted but recognizable figure, now he was surrounded by a shimmering aura that hurt to look at, a distortion of space that made the air around him ripple like heat haze, but with impossible angles and colors that shouldn't exist. His form seemed to shift at the edges, as if not fully anchored to reality. The interface screamed in Leo's mind, not with words but with raw data, entity enhancement detected. Assimilation progress, 32%. Direct intervention imminent. Above the mountains, the sky darkened not with clouds but with something else, a swirling vortex of black and violet that swallowed the dawnlight, casting the landscape in unnatural twilight. The air grew cold, and Leo felt a pressure building, not in his ears but in his mind, as if reality itself were being squeezed. The architect raised a hand, and his Horde surged forward. But they moved differently now, not with the mindless hunger of infected, but with coordinated, intelligent malice. And in the warped sky above, shapes began to form in the vortex, too vast and strange to comprehend. Leo gripped the window frame, his knuckles white. The battle was beginning, but it was no longer just against the architect. The entities were here. The mountain trembled. Not with the slow, geological patience of stone settling, but with the violent, percussive rhythm of something hammering against its bones. Dust sifted from the bunker's reinforced ceiling, painting the sterile white corridors in a fine gray powder. The distant, muffled roar of the architect's horde was no longer distant. It was a constant, grinding snarl that vibrated through the floor plates and up into Leo's teeth. He stood in the command center, a converted laboratory now lit by the harsh red glow of emergency lighting. Screens flickered with static-laced feeds from external cameras. The outer perimeter, a kill zone of automated turrets and razor wire Leo had coordinated with psychic coordination, was gone. Consumed. The cameras showed only a churning mass of infected bodies, a tide of gray flesh and snapping jaws washing against the bunker's blast doors. Among them moved the architect's enhanced mutants, their forms warped by the same cosmic rot that flowed through Leo, but twisted to a different, malicious purpose. And at their center, a shimmering distortion in the air, a figure that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. The architect. Its non-Euclidean aura pulsed with sickly light, bending the very light around it. There through the outer wire, Dr. Vance's voice was clipped, military calm, but Leo could hear the tremor beneath. The scientist stood at a console, his fingers flying over keys. Pressure sensors on the primary blast door are reading catastrophic stress. Estimated breach in 5 minutes. Across the room, the other survivors huddled. David clutched a fire axe taken from an emergency panel, his knuckles white. Mia had her kitchen knife, her eyes wide and fixed on the shuddering main door. Jake held his baseball bat like a lifeline, while Eleanor whispered a frantic prayer. Anya, the doctor, was binding a makeshift bandage around a cut on Dr. Keller's arm. The older scientist had been thrown against a console when the first shockwave hit. Leo felt the assault through his psychic link. Not as sound or sight, but as a series of psychic shrieks and sudden silences. His horde, his 4 baseline infected and the single, powerful fused mutant alpha, was engaged in the narrow mountain passes just outside the bunker entrance. Through their senses, he tasted blood and ozone, felt the crunch of bone under claw, and the searing pain as the architect's enhanced mutants tore into them. The alpha was holding, a bulwark of muscle and rage, but it was being pushed back, step by brutal step. Each loss, each spike of agony from his linked creatures, was a needle driven into the fraying fabric of Leo's mind. His sanity, already hanging by a thread at -2.1%, quivered. The world around him threatened to double expose itself. The clean lines of the command console wavered, and for a heartbeat, he saw not metal and plastic, but a lattice of pulsating, organic tubes, pumping with black ichor. The faces of the survivors flickered, their features momentarily elongating into the screaming masks of the cosmic rot's victims. He clenched his jaw, focusing on the cold feel of the console under his palms, the smell of dust and fear sweat. The sanity anchor he'd forged, the memory tether of these people's faces, their fragile humanity, was a gossamer strand now, stretched taut and fraying. Leo. Mia's voice cut through the din, the door. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the chamber. A seam of light appeared around the edges of the massive blast door, and dust exploded inward as it began to buckle. From beyond came the sound of rending metal and a chorus of hungry, mindless cries. The architect's horde was at the threshold. Fall back to the inner barricade. Vance shouted, grabbing a rifle from a wall rack. The survivors scrambled, dragging crates and lab tables into a haphazard wall at the room's far end. David and Jake braced a heavy metal shelving unit. Leo didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the psychic maelstrom outside. His alpha was surrounded, 3 of the architect's enhanced mutants ripping into its flanks. His baseline infected were gone, their psychic signatures snuffed out one by one. He was down to 1 unit. And the architect's shimmering form was advancing, untouched, its aura making the air crackle with static discharge. It would be inside in moments. The turrets, the traps, the coordination, it had all been for nothing. The entity's countdown was ticking down in his skull, a silent, inexorable metronome. There was one command left. One he had seen in the interface's deepest menus, glowing with forbidden promise and catastrophic cost. Ultimate command, Horde Apotheosis. The description had been brief, terrifying, temporary singularity. Total fusion. Absolute control. Sanity cost, catastrophic. To use it would be to spend the last coin of his humanity. The final fragment of his coherent self. But to not use it was to die here, and let the architect, a puppet of the entities just as he was, but one that had embraced the madness, claim this bunker, these people, and whatever fragile hope the sanitizer represented. He made the choice not with words, but with a surge of desperate will. He reached into the psychic link, not to guide or suggest, but to command with absolute, tyrannical force. He grabbed the psychic essence of his remaining alpha, and then, reaching further, he pulled at the dissipating psychic echoes of his fallen baseline infected, the fragments of their presence still lingering in the ether of the interface. Fuse, he thought, and the word was not a sound but a law imposed upon reality. The cost was immediate and absolute. It was not a drop in sanity. It was the floor falling away. The -2.1% plummeted into an abyss. The gossamer strand of his sanity anchor snapped. Leo's vision whited out. The bunker, the survivors, the buckling door, all vanished. He was nowhere and everywhere. He was a mode of consciousness adrift in a sea of screaming, merging minds. He felt the alpha's brute strength, the baseline infected simple hunger, their collective rage and pain and alien biology. He forced them together, not as a group, but as a single new thing. Matter screamed as it was rewritten. Flesh flowed like liquid wax, bones cracked and reforged into new architectures of support. Claws elongated into scythes, muscle mass ballooned, and a second, smaller set of arms erupted from a heaving torso. A single, baleful eye, burning with stolen psychic fire, opened on a featureless head. The merged entity stood, a colossal, asymmetrical horror of grafted flesh and exposed bone, 15 feet tall, its very presence warping the air with heat haze. And as his horde underwent its apotheosis, Leo fell into his own. The vision consumed him. The entities were not behind a veil. They were the veil. He saw them, or the shadow they cast upon the shallow pool of his comprehension. Vast, geometric shapes that existed in dimensions his mind had no names for, turning slowly in a void that was not empty but full of a deafening, silent music. They were watching. Not the battle, not the bunker. They were watching him. The experiment. Patient zero. A single cell in a petri dish the size of a planet, reacting to stimulus. Their gaze was a pressure, an infinite weight that sought to flatten his identity into a data point. He understood, in that moment of total, sanity-shattering clarity, the true scope of the interface. It was not a tool. It was a syringe, and Earth was the culture medium. He was the first sign of infection, and they were noting the progress with detached, cosmic interest. In the real world, which now felt like a poorly remembered dream, the colossal merged horde moved. It did not walk, it unfolded across the space between the breached door and the advancing architect. The architect's enhanced mutants leapt to meet it, and were swatted aside like insects, their bodies breaking against stone. The architect itself, the shimmering core of the rival horde, halted. Its non-Euclidean aura flared, and it raised clawed hands, space distorting around them in defensive ripples. The two abominations clashed. There was no finesse. It was primordial force against warped reality. The merged horde scythe-claws tore at the architect's aura, each impact releasing shrieks of tortured physics and sprays of iridescent energy. The architect retaliated, its touch causing the merged horde's flesh to bubble and necrotize in patches, but the colossal entity was too vast, too single-minded in its purpose, a purpose poured into it by Leo's last coherent command, destroy. It grabbed the architect. The aura crackled and spat, burning the merged horde's arms down to blackened bone, but the grip held. With a final, convulsive heave of impossible muscle, the merged horde brought its other set of arms around and sundered the architect's form. The shimmering aura collapsed with a sound like a universe sighing. The twisted body within came apart in a burst of black fluid and dissolving light. As the architect died, its horde, the hundreds of baseline and enhanced infected, stumbled, then collapsed like marionettes with cut strings. The psychic pressure assaulting the bunker vanished, leaving a ringing silence broken only by the drip of fluids and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The merged horde stood amidst the carnage for a moment, a monument of victory and horror. Then, with a deep, wet sigh, it began to dissolve. The fusion was unstable, temporary. Flesh sloughed away, the colossal form deflating into a steaming, unrecognizable mound of biomatter that quickly began to blacken and crumble into dust. In the command center, Leo slumped against the console. He did not fall. He simply ceased to hold himself up. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing of the room. They were fixed on a point 1,000 miles away, reflecting the swirling, impossible colors of the void. He was hollow. The vision of the entities had scoured him out. The man who had been Leo, who had worried about rent, who had enjoyed bad coffee, who had fought to remember the feel of sunlight on human skin, was gone. What remained was a shell, a conduit. A quiet place where the cosmic wind now whistled through freely. The survivors stared, first at the dissipating horror outside the shattered door, then at Leo. Anya took a hesitant step toward him, her medical training warring with her terror. "Leo?" He did not respond. Then, the voice came. It did not come from the interface text. It did not come from his mind. It was everywhere. It vibrated in the metal of the bunker, resonated in the marrow of their bones, and echoed in the suddenly still air. It was the voice from Chapter 11, but amplified 1,000-fold, stripped of all pretense of communication, becoming pure, overwhelming imperative. Assimilation progress, 99%. Prepare for convergence. The words were not English. They were understood directly, a psychic brand seared into reality. As the final syllable faded, the bunker's remaining lights died. The screens went black. For 3 heartbeats, there was total, suffocating darkness and silence. Then, every light, emergency strips, console LEDs, even the tiny power indicators on dead equipment, flared to life simultaneously, blazing with a painful, actinic white light before overloading and bursting in showers of sparks. The air grew thick, charged with ozone and another scent, sweet and metallic like opened veins. From outside, through the ruined doorway, a light began to grow. Not sunlight. Not the glow of fire. It was a riot of impossible colors, swirling and bleeding into one another in patterns that defied geometry. The survivors turned, shielding their eyes. Jake pointed a trembling finger. The sky above the mountain peak was tearing open. A vertical rift, a jagged wound in the fabric of the world, was spreading like a crack in glass. Through it poured the light, violet, chartreuse, a gold that hurt, and with the light came a deep, subsonic hum that made their teeth ache and their stomachs lurch. The rift pulsed, widening, and in its depths, shapes seemed to move. Vast, slow, and indifferent. Inside the bunker, amidst the sparks and the dying systems, the hollow shell that had been Leo slowly turned its head. Its empty eyes tracked upward, toward the ceiling, as if it could see through the rock to the screaming sky above. A single, black tear, thick as oil, traced a path down its motionless cheek. The rift in the sky pulsed with a rhythm that defied human comprehension. Swirling colors that had no name in any earthly language churned in the tear above the mountain, casting impossible shadows that twisted the geometry of the bunker's exterior. Tendrils of cosmic energy, shimmering like liquid starlight threaded with veins of absolute void, began to descend toward the reinforced concrete and steel. Inside the control room, the survivors stared through the reinforced viewport. David's glasses reflected the madness outside, his knuckles white where he gripped a console edge. Mia clutched her backpack straps, the kitchen knife she'd carried for weeks forgotten on a nearby chair. Jake's baseball bat lay discarded, his teenage bravado evaporated before the spectacle. Eleanor whispered prayers that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Anya, the doctor, stood closest to the window, her medical scrub stained with blood that wasn't hers. Their eyes kept returning to the figure slumped in the corner. Leo sat against the wall, his back to the cold metal, legs splayed before him. His eyes were open but saw nothing of the room. They held only the afterimage of what he'd witnessed when he'd used Horde apotheosis, the vast, multidimensional entities observing Earth's assimilation like children watching ants beneath a magnifying glass. His breathing was shallow but steady, a mechanical rhythm unconnected to any conscious thought. Drool traced a thin line from the corner of his mouth to his chin. When Anya had tried to wipe it away minutes earlier, his head had lolled without resistance, like a doll's. "He's gone," Dr. Vance said, his military-trained voice tight. Catatonic. Complete psychic burnout. The interface consumed what was left. Dr. Keller adjusted his glasses, the bunker's emergency lights glinting off the lenses. The assimilation progress is at 99%. The rift is the convergence point. When those tendrils touch ground. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Outside, the first tendril brushed the mountainside. Where it touched, rock didn't melt or vaporize, it simply ceased to be, replaced by a patch of shimmering non-space that hurt to look at. The mountain groaned, a deep seismic protest as reality itself frayed at the edges. Mia turned from the window, her face pale. "We need to move. Now." "To where?" Jake's voice cracked. "There's nowhere left." David looked at Leo. "He brought us here. He fought for us. Even when it cost him everything." Anya knelt beside Leo, her medical training warring with the horror of what she was seeing. She'd examined his blood back in the subway car, seen the cosmic patterns swimming in the crimson fluid. Now, those patterns were visible in his eyes, faint, eldritch lights that flickered in the depths of his irises like distant stars winking through fog. She placed a hand on his cheek. His skin was cool, unnaturally so. "Leo," she whispered. "If you can hear me, we need you. One last time." There was no response. Not a twitch, not a blink. Just the steady, hollow breathing. Another tendril descended, closer this time. It brushed the bunker's outer turret, the same automated defense Leo had coordinated with using psychic coordination just hours before. The metal didn't bend or break. It unraveled, its molecular structure rewritten into something that pulsed with the same impossible colors as the rift. The turret fired one last, wild burst before dissolving into the cosmic energy, the bullets evaporating before they could travel 10 feet. Dr. Keller's console lit up with warnings. Structural integrity failing at point of contact. The bunker won't hold. "We have to get to the lower levels," Vance said, already moving toward the door. "The deep storage vaults might." "No." The word was so soft they almost missed it. Leo's lips hadn't moved. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a psychic whisper that vibrated in their bones rather than their ears. Anya jerked her hand back as if burned. Leo's head tilted forward, just an inch. His eyes remained unfocused, but the eldritch lights within them brightened. Inside what remained of his mind, Leo wasn't thinking in words. Words were human constructs, too limited for what he now understood. He perceived instead in concepts, in patterns, in the terrifying geometry of cosmic truth. The interface still pulsed in his brain, a foreign organ grafted to his consciousness. It showed him the assimilation countdown, 99.1%, 99.2%, ticking upward with each passing second. It showed him the tendrils reaching down, the rift widening, the entities preparing to step through into a reality too fragile to contain them. And it showed him one last option. Not a command for the Horde, his Horde was gone, dissolved after the apotheosis. Not a psychic attack or defense. Something deeper, buried in the interface's core protocols. Self-termination. The label was misleading. It didn't mean death, not physical death. It meant severance. A complete psychic amputation of the connection between Patient Zero and the assimilation network. The cost was absolute, whatever remained of the user's consciousness would be sacrificed to power the severance. A total burnout of the soul. Leo didn't hesitate. There was no Leo left to hesitate, just a collection of memories and instincts clinging to the wreckage of a mind. But those memories included David's stubborn hope in the subway car. Mia's fierce protectiveness. Jake's desperate courage. Eleanor's quiet strength. Anya's compassion even when faced with the monstrous. Dr. Keller's determination to save something. Even Dr. Vance's pragmatic survivalism. Human things. Fragile, beautiful, worth preserving. He reached for the protocol with the last spark of will. The world didn't explode. There was no dramatic flash of light. Instead, a silence fell, a silence so profound it felt like pressure. The hum of the bunker's generators ceased. The warning lights on the consoles flickered and died. Even the distant roar of the wind outside vanished. In that silence, Leo felt something tear. It wasn't a physical sensation. It was the psychic equivalent of having his nervous system ripped out by the roots. The connection to the interface, the constant background noise of the Horde's psychic presence, the whispers of the entities, the flow of assimilation data, snapped. The severance was clean, surgical, and utterly devastating. What little remained of Leo's sanity didn't just shatter. It vaporized. The last human thoughts, a memory of sunlight on grass, the smell of rain, the warmth of another person's hand, dissolved into static. The cosmic truths he'd glimpsed, the horrifying revelations about reality's true nature, didn't fade. They became the only reality. But without the interface to interpret them, without a conscious mind to process them, they simply were. Background noise in an empty room. His body convulsed once, a violent shudder that arched his back off the wall. Then he went utterly still. The eldritch lights in his eyes didn't disappear, they settled into a faint, constant glow. But the intelligence behind them was gone. Replaced by nothing. A perfect, hollow vessel. Outside, the rift shuddered. The tendrils of cosmic energy wavered, their descent halting. The swirling colors in the tear above the mountain began to slow, their chaotic patterns resolving into something almost orderly. The assimilation progress counter, visible only to Leo's ruined perception, froze at 99.7%. Then, with agonizing slowness, it began to tick backward. 99.6%. 99.5%. The rift wasn't closing yet, but its expansion had stopped. The convergence had been interrupted. Look! Jake pointed through the viewport. The tendril that had been dissolving the turret retracted, pulling back toward the rift. The patch of non-space it left behind didn't heal, the mountain remained scarred with impossible geometry, but it stopped spreading. Dr. Keller stared at his console, which had flickered back to life. Energy readings from the rift are decreasing. The assimilation signal is weakening. Anya looked from the window to Leo. He hadn't moved since the convulsion. His eyes were still open, still glowing faintly, but they were empty. Truly empty. When she waved a hand before his face, there was no reaction. No pupil dilation, no blink, nothing. What did he do? She whispered. David approached slowly. He saved us. At what cost? Mia's voice was thick. They didn't have time to mourn. The bunker shuddered as another section of the outer wall destabilized. Not from cosmic energy now, just structural damage from the earlier battle and the rift's proximity. We need to get to the lower levels, Vance repeated, this time with urgency. Now. He moved to Leo's side, hooking an arm under his shoulders. Help me with him. David took Leo's other side. Together, they lifted him. Leo's body was limp, dead weight, but he was breathing. His feet dragged as they carried him toward the emergency stairwell. Mia grabbed their meager supplies, the backpack, the extinguisher David had long since abandoned, Anya's medical kit. Jake helped Eleanor, whose age had finally caught up with her in the adrenaline crash. They descended into the bunker's depths, leaving the control room behind. Through reinforced windows on the stairwell landings, they caught glimpses of the outside world. The rift still hung in the sky, but it was shrinking now, the colors fading from impossible hues to mere violets and deep blues. The tendrils had fully retracted. Below, on the mountain slopes, they saw movement. The infected. Without Leo's control, without the architect's malice, without the assimilation drive directing them, they moved aimlessly. Some stumbled in circles. Others simply stood, swaying slightly, as if waiting for commands that would never come. A few wandered away from the mountain, drawn by some basal instinct toward movement or sound, but without coordination. Without purpose. The horde had dispersed. Not destroyed, just mindless. They reached the deepest storage vault, a cavernous room lined with emergency supplies and hardened servers. Vance sealed the blast door behind them. The air was cool, recycled, sterile. For the first time in days, there was no immediate threat. They laid Leo on a cot in a corner. Anya checked his vitals, steady heartbeat, steady breathing, normal temperature except for the unnatural coolness of his skin. His eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling. The eldritch glow was faint but persistent. He's not there, she said quietly. Brain activity is minimal. Just autonomic functions. It's like a coma, but... She trailed off, unable to articulate the wrongness of it. Dr. Keller examined the bunker's systems from a terminal. The rift closed completely about 20 minutes ago. The cosmic energy signatures have dropped to background levels. The assimilation progress. He shook his head. The signal's gone. Whatever Leo did, it worked. Worked? Mia hugged herself. Look at him. They all looked. Leo on the cot, empty. The price of truth. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Months passed. The bunker became a sanctuary. The scientists, with David's technical help and Mia's organizational skills, stabilized the systems. They rationed supplies, established shifts, created a fragile routine. Jake took to maintaining the perimeter sensors. Eleanor tended a small hydroponic garden they'd managed to revive. Dr. Vance organized defense drills, though the threats were fewer now. The infected still roamed outside, but without direction, they were more hazard than army. Small groups occasionally stumbled near the bunker's exterior defenses, but the automated turrets, those that remained functional, dealt with them easily. The military forces had withdrawn after the Rift event, their communications suggesting a global retreat to reassess the changed threat. Rival mutants like the Architect were gone, destroyed in the final battle or left mindless like the rest. The world was saved. Broken, scarred, forever changed by the cosmic rot and the truths it had revealed, but saved from complete assimilation. In a quiet room deep in the bunker, Leo sat in a chair by a blank wall. He sat there every day, from morning until evening, when Anya would come to help him to his cot. He didn't resist. He didn't assist. He moved when guided, ate when food was placed in his mouth, drank when water was held to his lips. His eyes were always open, always staring. The eldritch glow never faded entirely, it flickered occasionally, like a candle flame in a draught. Anya monitored him daily. She'd taken it upon herself, a penance or a duty she couldn't articulate. She checked his vitals, drew blood samples, noted every minute change. The blood still showed the cosmic patterns, though they were fainter now, less active. As if whatever remained of the interface in his brain was dormant, not dead. One afternoon, as autumn leaves blew against the bunker's exterior cameras, she sat with him as usual. She was recording notes on a tablet when she saw it. His eyes flickered. Not a blink, a flicker of the eldritch light within, a brief brightening that lasted less than a second. Then it was gone. She might have imagined it, but she'd been watching him for months. She knew his empty stare intimately. She leaned closer. Leo. No response. Just the steady breathing, the hollow eyes. She was about to turn away when words formed in her mind. Not a voice, just text, crisp and clear against the darkness behind her eyes, in the same sterile font as the interface's messages had been when Leo still had the capacity to perceive them. Entity arrival delayed. Patient 0 remains, interesting, ***. The words hung in her consciousness for a moment, then faded like ink in water. She gasped, stumbling back from her chair. Leo hadn't moved. His expression hadn't changed. But for that one instant, she'd seen something in his eyes, not intelligence, not awareness, but presence. Something observing from behind the emptiness. Outside, through the bunker's sensors, the infected wandered the mountain slopes without purpose. The world was quiet. The cosmic horrors had been pushed back, their timetable disrupted. But in that quiet room, Leo sat between humanity and horror, a silent prophet of truths too terrible to speak, his eyes holding a light that never quite went out.